dense canopies block sunlight and bend familiar sounds into whispers as paths wind through forests where trails end abruptly and maps offer no certainty. Across continents, from the shadowed ridges of northern California to the remote reaches of Australia, countless travellers, hikers, and explorers have vanished without explanation, leaving behind only scattered belongings, faint footprints, or stories that never fully resolve. In these forests, abandoned logging roads, hidden ravines, and uncharted glades transform the ordinary into something disorienting and elusive. As we step into each shadowed trail, we will uncover accounts of disappearances spanning decades, witness how nature and human error collide, and trace the eerie patterns that bind these isolated landscapes. Each forest holds its own secrets, and with every turn the question lingers, why do some who enter these woods never return? The Vanishing Trails of Aokigahara Forest, Japan. The early light that filters through the canopy along the northwestern base of Mount Fuji carries an unusual stillness, a quality that settles heavily over Aokigahara Forest and makes its edges feel older than the mountain itself. Known locally as Jukai, the Sea of Trees, it spreads across hardened lava laid down by the 864 eruption of Mount Fuji, a geological foundation that created the forest's twisting root systems, porous terrain, and sound-absorbing density. Visitors often describe the first steps inside as though entering a place designed to muffle movement and swallow direction, its narrow paths curving into one another until distance becomes difficult to measure and silence becomes part of the landscape. Over decades, this strange quiet has been the backdrop for one of Japan's most persistent mysteries, as an unsettling number of hikers have disappeared within its interior without yielding clear explanations or physical traces. As researchers began looking into the unusual navigational challenges of Aokigahara, they noted that the iron-rich lava beneath the forest floor can disrupt compasses, creating minor deviations that become significant when paired with the dense woodland and absence of natural landmarks. This geological feature, while not strong enough to send instruments spinning, has been shown to produce unreliable bearings and subtle shifts that confuse inexperienced hikers. Local authorities regularly report cases of visitors who intended short walks, but ended up hours deep into the interior, unable to retrace their steps. The uniformity of the terrain compounds the problem. The forest's thick clusters of hemlock, Japanese cypress, and broadleaf species create repeating corridors that disorient even those with strong spatial awareness. Search and rescue groups operating in the forest explain that the root systems, which often rise above the ground in tangled patterns, form natural barriers that trap or redirect those who step off the designated trails. The forest floor is made of fractured lava tubes and uneven pockets, creating sudden depressions or shallow cavities where sound dissipates and footsteps are dulled. Over the years, some missing hikers have been found only a short distance from major paths, lying in areas concealed by undergrowth so thick that even aerial searchers struggle to identify disturbances. Others are never recovered, despite organised sweeps that follow known routes and likely drift patterns. This inconsistency fuels the sense that disappearances in Aokigahara are not simply due to getting lost, but tied to something more elusive within the forest's character. Local history adds layers of meaning to the landscape. Aokigahara first appeared in written records during the Heian period, and its remote nature made it a site associated with spiritual boundary lines and folk tales centered on lost souls wandering in wooded places. While modern interpretations tend to dramatize these stories, historical accounts do describe the forest as a liminal environment where direction, identity, and memory could be easily unsettled. Such descriptions resonate with contemporary reports from hikers who claim that time feels distorted inside the forest, often noting that what seemed like an hour's walk stretched into several without their awareness. These experiences do not imply supernatural causes so much as they emphasize how the forest's sensory conditions, its dim interiors, filtered light, and persistent quiet, can influence perception. Park rangers have observed that Aokigahara's disappearances often occur along unofficial paths branching from older lava trail corridors that have existed since at least the early 20th century. These side trails, formed by decades of foot traffic, lead into parts of the forest where moss-covered ridges and shallow caves interrupt any sense of orderly navigation. Some of the caves, such as the Narusawa Ice Cave and Fugaku Wind Cave, located on the forest periphery, reveal how the terrain dips suddenly and unpredictably, suggesting how easily a misstep in deeper, unmarked zones could result in injuries that prevent individuals from finding their way back. Despite increased signage and fencing in recent decades, stray paths continue to appear as visitors attempt shortcuts, inadvertently expanding the labyrinth of routes that contribute to the forest's reputation. The forest climate also plays a role in its mysteries. Aokigahara receives frequent low-lying fog due to the combination of cool winds from Mount Fuji and moisture that settles among the trees. This fog reduces visibility dramatically, sometimes condensing into faint, shifting curtains that cause hikers to misjudge distances or step away from the main trail, believing they are maintaining a straight line. Veteran mountaineers accustomed to high-altitude conditions have reported difficulty navigating in these moments, and while most eventually return, a small number do not, adding to the long list of unresolved disappearances documented by local police units. These cases rarely include signs of animal involvement or indications of deliberate retreat, leaving investigators with little to work from. Notably, Aokigahara's long-standing association with vanishings led authorities to implement preventative patrols beginning in the late 20th century. These patrols search for individuals lingering off-trail, often intervening before situations worsen. However, rangers point out that the forest's size, over 30 square kilometres, and its interconnected routes make it impossible to monitor continuously. In areas beyond human hearing range, missing hikers have no practical means of signalling for help, as the thick vegetation absorbs sound so effectively that even shouting can fade after a short distance. This unusual acoustic property was confirmed in recent studies analysing how porous lava and dense plant growth compress and scatter sound waves, reinforcing the idea that Aokigahara's physical environment directly shapes the circumstances under which people disappear. There have also been rare cases where hikers left behind clues that suggested attempts at self-guided rescue. Investigators have found plastic tape or string tied to branches, a method used by some trekkers to mark their path in hopes of retracing it. Yet many of these markers end abruptly, as though the individuals stop tying them after gaining a false sense of direction, only to stray deeper into the forest. In one case documented by Yamanashi Prefecture officials, a trail of tape ended near a cluster of rock formations, where the ground descended sharply. The missing person was never located, despite extensive searches in the surrounding area, illustrating how even precautionary measures can be undermined by the terrain's deceptive continuity. One of the most confounding aspects of Aokigahara's disappearance cases is the absence of clear patterns. Ages, backgrounds, and experience levels vary widely among those who vanish. Some are seasoned hikers, others are casual visitors intending short strolls. Weather conditions range from clear to misty, and disappearances occur across multiple seasons. Authorities emphasize that while external factors like disorientation, injuries, and environmental hazards undoubtedly contribute, the forest complexity creates a scenario where even small mistakes compound quickly. This lack of a single cause contributes to the lingering mystery, suggesting that Aokigahara's influence lies not in dramatic events, but in the cumulative effect of its quiet, shadowed expanse. In recent years, advanced mapping and GPS technologies have improved safety, yet rangers note that dense canopy and signal interference still create gaps in coverage. Devices that function perfectly near the forest entrance may fail once deeper inside, leaving hikers dependent on intuition in a place where intuition is notoriously unreliable. Some experts studying wilderness disappearances categorize Aokigahara as a high-loss environment, meaning the landscape's natural features amplify the consequences of small navigational errors. This classification places it among a small group of forests worldwide where unresolved missing person cases persist, even with modern search techniques. Despite increased awareness, Aokigahara retains an atmosphere that invites interpretation. Its twisted routes, silent corridors, and shifting light foster a sense that the forest operates according to its own rules, indifferent to the clarity sought by investigators. Many who walk its marked trails feel an instinctive caution, recognizing that beyond the guide ropes and signposts lies a terrain where direction becomes negotiable and sound retreats into the trees. The forest's history of unexplained vanishings does not rely on folklore for its weight. It emerges from the tangible, measurable qualities of the land itself, qualities that create conditions where people can step out of sight and never be seen again. And somewhere past those narrow trails, the silence waits for its next unanswered question. The Missing Walkers of Bennington Triangle, USA, Vermont. Across the lower slopes of Glastonbury Mountain, the forest stretches in long, uneven corridors that seem to drift in and out of focus as travellers follow the older footpaths, and the deeper one walks, the more the terrain begins to feel like a place that rearranges itself with every shift of wind and light. The name Bennington Triangle entered regional vocabulary long after the disappearances that defined it, yet the sense of something unreliable in these woods had been part of local experience for generations. Even today, the first impression of this forested region in southwestern Vermont is not one of danger but of subtle disorientation, as though the Green Mountains permit passage only to those who do not linger too long. It is within this wandering landscape, shaped by abandoned town sites, collapsing trails and long-forgotten routes, that the record of vanishings began to accumulate, leaving a quiet unease that never truly lifted from Glastonbury's slopes. Along these ridges, the landscape behaves with a kind of unpredictable rhythm that has challenged hikers for more than a century, and those who study the area's history note how quickly conditions can shift from open views to dense fog banks that settle without warning. Before the turn of the 20th century, Glastonbury had already begun its decline as a logging community, with rail lines and sawmills gradually falling out of use once the local timber had been exhausted. By 1930, the town was formally unincorporated, leaving behind a handful of cellar holes, decaying roots and boundary markers swallowed by undergrowth. These fragments of settlement created a terrain where human presence once felt permanent, yet the mountain reclaimed it with remarkable speed, pulling old paths into thickets and leaving untrained navigators susceptible to subtle but consequential missteps. In such a setting, the first modern disappearances took shape around the unpredictability that has always defined this forest. When the disappearance of Paula Jean Weldon in December 1946 sent searchers into the dense reaches of the Long Trail, the mystery of this region gained a permanence it had never carried before, in part because her final known movements were so ordinary. Weldon, a sophomore at Bennington College, set off for a late afternoon walk dressed lightly, expecting to follow a familiar section of trail and return before nightfall. Witnesses saw her walking confidently along a route not considered dangerous at the time, yet when she failed to return, the response became one of the most extensive searches in Vermont's history. Hundreds of volunteers, state police, and even army units scoured the forest for weeks, but no clothing, footprints, or belongings were ever found. What troubled investigators most was how open the terrain should have been in winter, and how unlikely it would be for remains to go unnoticed. The case eventually led to the creation of the Vermont State Police, but the mystery surrounding Weldon's disappearance never reached closure. Before her case, the vanishing of Midi Rivers had already revealed how easily experience falters in the shifting topography around the mountain, because Rivers was not a novice traveller. A seasoned local hunter and guide, he led a group into the forest in November 1945, walking ahead of them as he often did. When he turned a bend near the Hell Hollow area of Glastonbury, he slipped out of sight for only moments, yet he was never seen again. Search teams tracked his known hunting routes and familiar lookouts, expecting to find signs of injury or disorientation, but nothing indicated where he had gone. Local accounts described hearing occasional gunshots in the following days, though these could never be verified, and it remained unclear whether they came from Rivers or from unrelated activity deeper in the woods. His disappearance, like Weldon's later on, reinforced the idea that the forest paths do not always lead where they appear to. Within the following 5 years, an unsettling cluster of cases emerged that tied together different ages, locations, and circumstances in a way investigators could not explain, particularly because the disappearances did not follow predictable patterns. James Tedford, a veteran, vanished from a moving bus in 1949 while travelling toward Bennington. Passengers reported seeing him seated only moments before the vehicle reached its destination, yet all of his belongings remained on board. In 1950, 8-year-old Paul Jepson disappeared from a farm near the woods while his mother tended to animals, and only a faint scent trail led search dogs toward Glastonbury's slopes before fading entirely. Later that same year, Frida Langer, an experienced outdoorswoman, went missing while hiking with her cousin. Although her remains were discovered months later, in an area that had been thoroughly searched, the condition of the site raised more questions than answers. These cases, occurring in such quick succession, deepen the sense that something in the forest could interrupt even the most ordinary days. Farther into the interior, hikers continue to describe environmental quirks that complicate even the most careful attempts at navigation, including sudden distortions in sound, where voices seem to carry from the wrong direction or vanish altogether. The Green Mountains are known for unusual temperature inversions, rapid cloud formations, and steep, uneven slopes that disguise orientation, but Glastonbury's particular blend of spruce stands and narrow hollows creates a maze of echoing channels. Compasses have occasionally been reported behaving consistently, though not in a way that suggests a single magnetic anomaly. Instead, the effect appears brief and localized, like small pockets where the forest distorts movement for reasons that remain uncertain. Search teams over the years have noted how quickly the surroundings can shift from clear visibility to near-complete obscurity, especially when descending paths that appear stable until fog rolls down from the summit. These environmental factors, while not supernatural, contribute to confusion in ways that accumulate quietly and dangerously, from the remnants of abandoned logging camps to faint traces of forgotten hunting trails. The mountain still holds the outlines of lives that passed through, long before the disappearances became local law, and these older routes often intersect modern trails in unpredictable ways. Historical maps of the region reveal a once active network of switchbacks, skid roads, and horse-drawn tramways, many of which no longer align with the present landscape. The forest regrowth obscures these paths with deceptive familiarity, making a forgotten route appear safer than the well-marked one nearby. Archaeologists and surveyors who have studied Glastonbury's past note that the boundary between historical occupation and modern wilderness is blurred here more than in other parts of Vermont, as though the mountain absorbed human settlement rather than merely outlasting it. This sense of layered terrain shapes how people experience the forest today, where every ridge hints at an earlier purpose. Beyond the official reports, quiet accounts from search teams and long-time residents speak of belongings found in places that contradict expected movement, as though those who disappeared had changed direction without reason. A glove discovered far upslope from where tracks ended, a scrap of fabric located on the opposite side of a ridge from where dogs had led, or footprints that began confidently before veering into areas with no clear destination. These fragments appear throughout the historical record. While none constitute definitive evidence, their persistence adds to the forest's reputation for disordered paths. Those familiar with the mountain often describe an intuition that something feels off long before they articulate why, recalling minor moments in which the trail ahead seemed subtly altered or a familiar landmark appeared misplaced. These reflections, while not formally documented, contribute to the atmosphere of a place that does not reveal everything it holds. Through the network of modern trails, the forest offers a peaceful face that hides the long memory of those who walked into its depths and never came back, and the quiet that surrounds the mountain today feels uncannily attuned to its own history. Visitors often speak of how tranquil the woods appear, yet the knowledge of what transpired here shapes even peaceful walks with an underlying tension. Glastonbury Mountain stands without markers or memorials for those who vanished across its slopes, holding their stories in an expanse of wilderness that feels both open and unreadable. The mystery that surrounds the Bennington Triangle persists not because of sensational legends, but because the documented facts reveal a pattern that resists explanation even after decades of investigation and retelling. Far past the final marked trail, the mountain holds a direction understood only by those who once followed it into silence. The silent borders of Epping Forest, England. Whispers of missing walkers and untold stories have clung to Epping Forest for centuries, threading through its history like a quiet undertow beneath the familiar paths, and while the modern visitor might pass through with casual awareness, the forest retains an almost imperceptible sense of absorption, as though it records departures no one witnesses. This expanse of ancient woodland, lying along the northeastern boundary of London, has long acted as a threshold between human habitation and the enduring quiet of nature, and though roads and villages skirt its edges, those who step deeper often find themselves navigating a place that refuses to fully reveal its secrets. Its long history of human use, from medieval timber harvesting to formal leisure walks, has left the terrain a mixture of open glades, narrow corridors, and hollowed tracks, all layered in ways that confound expectation. Even centuries of observation have not diminished the forest's capacity to swallow the unexpected, leaving gaps in memory and record that continue to intrigue historians and locals alike. Royal decrees and centuries of protection shaped a woodland that maintained its own order, preserving roots and clearings long after surrounding lands were altered or claimed, creating an environment both familiar and elusive. The Epping Forest Act of 1878, which codified protection for the area, sought to balance public access with preservation, yet the sheer density of pollarded trees and intertwined undergrowth maintained pockets of secrecy where human eyes rarely lingered. Coppiced hornbeams, centuries-old oaks, and winding gravel ridges formed an irregular mosaic that allowed paths to diverge or vanish without warning, a feature that has complicated both travel and record-keeping for generations. The forest's legal and ecological resilience fostered a paradox. It became simultaneously accessible and unfathomable, offering a sense of security to casual visitors while preserving its own inscrutable interior. 18th and 19th century parish records hint at individuals who vanished from work routes or errand trails, leaving only faint traces that confounded neighbours and constables alike. Labourers walking to the market, smallholders tending the outer edges, and riders transporting goods occasionally failed to return, their absences recorded in brief lines that provided no insight into what had befallen them. In many cases, search efforts were informal and limited, and reports focused more on missing property or delayed deliveries than on the person themselves. Even when extended searches took place, the forest's complex network of tracks and hidden hollows often rendered evidence invisible, suggesting that disappearance here was not always sudden or violent, but quietly facilitated by the forest's own intricacies. The era of highwaymen saw bridleways and secluded coppices serve as both hideouts and traps, where travellers sometimes disappeared without a witness or explanation. Notorious figures such as Dick Turpin and lesser-known brigands exploited the labyrinthine quality of the woodland, yet historical accounts leave room for speculation. How many individuals lost their way while avoiding them, or simply fell into concealed hollows and ditches along less travelled tracks? These bridleways, dug into the soil and reinforced with timber centuries earlier for timber extraction and cattle drives, offered both guidance and misdirection, channels that might seem straightforward from a distance but twist unpredictably once entered. The forest's use by outlaws thus added a layer of human-induced danger atop its natural complexity, making disappearances a matter of both environmental and social circumstance. Victorian-era leisure brought walkers and cyclists into the forest, and even casual excursions occasionally ended in baffling absence, despite well-trodden paths and nearby communities. As London expanded, recreational use of Epping Forest became fashionable, and guidebooks encouraged exploration along its picturesque routes. Yet the very popularity of these trails created misleading impressions of safety. Maps were often incomplete, signage minimal, and the old tracks themselves could diverge suddenly beneath the canopy, leaving gaps that a visitor might not recognise until it was too late. Newspapers from the period report missing ramblers who vanished for hours or days, sometimes found in minor disorientation, and sometimes never found at all, illustrating the forest's ability to neutralise ordinary caution. Hazards hidden within human-altered areas, pollarded hornbeams, sunken gravel tracks and narrow hollows, combined with the forest's layered growth to confuse and impede those searching for the missing. Coppicing, a centuries-old practice to sustain timber, created repetitive visual patterns that rendered distances and directions misleading, while soil erosion in frequently used tracks formed depressions where small items or footprints could disappear overnight. Spring-fed hollows could flood unexpectedly, and dense undergrowth concealed uneven terrain, producing natural traps invisible until encountered directly. Such environmental factors, while mundane on their own, compounded the sense of the forest as a place where orientation could be lost, evidence could vanish, and disappearances might occur without a trace. 20th century records continued to show disappearances among ramblers, local workers, and wartime travellers, with routes that seemed straightforward turning into puzzles for searchers. During World War II, for example, restricted areas for military training and nearby urban blackout zones altered patterns of movement, and anecdotal reports suggest that some individuals went missing along peripheral tracks used for evasion or commuting. Police files from the era mentioned several cases of temporary vanishings, often resolved only after days of absence, yet occasionally leaving no clear explanation. Even in peacetime, Epping Forest's network of intersecting paths created confusion. A hiker could follow a familiar route, yet minor deviations at junctions often led them unexpectedly deeper into obscured areas. Occasionally, bodies or remains surfaced, some tied to crime, others unresolved, reinforcing the forest's capacity to erase context, chronology, and explanation. Notable criminal investigations, including cases linked to serial offenders in the 20th century, were complicated by the forest's dense interior and poorly documented tracks. In some instances, remains were discovered years later, far from where the individuals were last seen, challenging assumptions about direction, distance, and movement. While forensic techniques have improved in the modern era, the forest continues to present gaps, spaces where time and vegetation obscure all but the faintest traces, suggesting a persistent capacity to absorb human presence without giving up its secrets. Modern visitors often recount the same sense of unpredictability, discovering that urban proximity does little to guarantee safety once one enters the interior paths. Joggers, walkers, and cyclists moving along familiar routes sometimes report disorientation or fleeting sensations of being watched, as if the forest itself monitors passage through its interior. Wildlife, foxes, deer, and birds, maintain their routines, indifferent to human activity, yet their presence underscores the forest's isolation at the edges of London life. Trails that appear straight on a map can twist unexpectedly, and formerly familiar landmarks can appear subtly altered after seasons of growth, reinforcing the forest's long-standing reputation as a place where disappearances are quietly possible, even in the 21st century. The forest's edges hold secrets that no trail marker, search party, or passing year has yet revealed. The Lost Steppe of Hoia-Baciu Forest, Romania. A sudden sense of vertigo and the inexplicable feeling of retracing one's own steps have haunted visitors to Hoia-Baciu Forest for decades, lending the place a reputation that is both psychological and physical, where ordinary footpaths seem to twist unpredictably and familiar landmarks appear subtly altered after only a few minutes of walking. Situated near Cluj-Napoca in Romania, the forest spans roughly 250 hectares and is bordered by both urban development and agricultural land, making its persistent mysteries all the more remarkable. Those who enter often report a disorienting sensation, a subtle pressure that encourages hesitation, as if the forest itself is actively reshaping perception. This perception of distortion is compounded by fog that forms suddenly in low areas and by patches of dense undergrowth that can obscure tracks, creating a landscape that confounds both the eye and the mind. For decades, Hoia-Baciu has drawn both casual visitors and serious investigators, all seeking answers to a series of disappearances that remain as enigmatic today as when they were first recorded. Historical records show that Hoia-Baciu, a forest long used for grazing and selective logging, acquired its eerie notoriety well before modern exploration or scientific attention, though details of early disappearances are scarce. The name Hoia-Baciu itself is steeped in local legend, believed to reference either a shepherd named Baciu who vanished mysteriously, or a term linked to unsettled spirits, highlighting the forest's connection to cultural memory. Accounts from the 18th and 19th centuries mention shepherds and villagers who failed to return from routine trips, disappearing without leaving clues, as if the forest had silently absorbed them into its depths. While these records are fragmentary, they suggest a long-standing awareness of the forest as a place where normal expectations of space and time do not always hold. This historical backdrop informs contemporary accounts, providing a sense that the forest's mysterious qualities have persisted for centuries, unaffected by changes in land use or population growth around its edges. Local legends speak of restless spirits and shadowy figures, stories passed down through generations that warn travellers of disappearing paths and unseen presences. Elders recount children vanishing briefly only to reappear days later, with no memory of where they had been, and hunters tell of sudden chills or inexplicable noises in areas otherwise familiar. Folklore often blends with tangible observation, producing a narrative that is neither fully myth nor fully documented fact, but which exerts a palpable influence on anyone venturing inside. These stories, while anecdotal, reveal a cultural lens through which the forest has been interpreted, colouring perceptions of space, movement, and danger. The psychological weight of such tales can amplify the real effects of disorientation, suggesting that disappearances may be both a physical and mental phenomenon. In recent years, researchers have documented unusual phenomena within the forest, including luminous orbs, fleeting shadows, and electromagnetic disturbances that defy simple explanation. Amateur physicists and paranormal investigators have reported compass needles spinning erratically, digital cameras failing in localized areas, and electronic devices acting unpredictably, often in conjunction with sightings of unexplained lights. While skeptics argue for optical illusions, reflections, or natural electromagnetic variations, the consistency of reports across multiple decades has prompted more formal study. Romanian parapsychologists and geophysicists have measured subtle anomalies in the forest's geomagnetic fields, though no clear causal link has been established between these readings and the reports of vanishings or perceptual disturbances. The result is a place that invites curiosity but simultaneously resists understanding, its phenomena hovering at the edge of scientific investigation. Disappearances within the forest often coincide with these phenomena, as hikers and investigators report sudden disorientation, nausea, and temporary loss of direction in otherwise familiar areas. Individuals have described taking a few steps along a well-marked path, only to find themselves circling back to the same clearing repeatedly, a sensation intensified by dense fog or low sunlight filtering through the canopy. Some cases involve brief periods of unconsciousness or confusion, after which the person appears unharmed but cannot account for the lost time. These accounts suggest a complex interplay between environmental factors and human perception, reinforcing the forest's reputation for making even routine excursions unpredictable. Historical and contemporary reports converge to indicate that disappearance here is not always permanent, yet always disconcerting, as if the forest enforces its own rules on those who enter. Amidst its dense beech trees, scattered clearings, and hollowed trails, the forest forms a landscape where perception often strays from reality, rendering navigation dangerous even for the skilled. Narrow corridors between trees can appear to extend indefinitely, and subtle changes in terrain, depressions, fallen branches, or uneven soil can mislead travellers into thinking they are progressing linearly when they are in fact looping. Clearings, though open and seemingly safe, often sit atop slight rises or depressions that warp visual perception, particularly in low light or during sudden weather changes. The combination of natural features and human-altered paths produces a space that is both visually compelling and deceptively treacherous, amplifying the likelihood of disorientation and temporary disappearance. Geologists and ecologists studying Hoia-Baciu have measured unusual soil patterns and minor geomagnetic fluctuations, yet none have definitively explained the persistent accounts of missing individuals. The soil composition, influenced by centuries of grazing and selective logging, appears to contribute minimally to magnetic anomalies, while local rock formations might amplify electromagnetic disturbances in certain areas. Biologists note that dense undergrowth and overlapping tree canopies can create microclimates with sudden fog or light distortions, potentially impacting human orientation. Despite these factual insights, the forest continues to present conditions that challenge even careful measurement, leaving open the possibility that more subtle environmental or psychological factors remain at play, eluding both science and local understanding. Visitor testimonies consistently describe compasses spinning unpredictably, sounds distorting across space, and lights flickering in ways that challenge both expectation and reason. Amateur explorers recount the sensation of being watched or followed, though no other person is present, and hikers often report sudden loss of direction without an identifiable cause. Photographers and videographers frequently capture anomalies in digital images, flashes of light, colour shifts, or shadowy forms that cannot be easily explained. While some dismiss these experiences as products of imagination or optical illusion, the repeated and cross-generational consistency of such reports lends weight to the forest's reputation as a place that subtly manipulates perception, where disappearance is not only physical but perceptual as well. Even today, disappearances continue, ranging from brief vanishings to unexplained absences that leave authorities and locals alike perplexed, proving that the forest's mysteries are far from exhausted. Modern technology has allowed for faster search and rescue, yet the forest retains the capacity to bewilder and confound, with individuals occasionally found hours later, sometimes at the very edge they initially entered, other times deeper within areas previously considered familiar. Despite its proximity to Cluj-Napoca and accessibility by marked trails, Hoia-Baciu forest continues to challenge notions of orientation and control, maintaining its role as one of the most enigmatic woodlands in Europe. Visitors are drawn by curiosity, but the forest's effects remain unpredictable, leaving each excursion potentially transformative and unknowable. Within Hoia-Baciu's tangled paths, the line between reality and the unseen bends, leaving each step uncertain and every return potentially incomplete. The sunken paths of Daring Woods, England, Kent. Deep hollows worn into the earth by centuries of footsteps and carts have given Daring Woods its reputation for swallowing travellers, where even experienced walkers find paths that seem to vanish beneath their feet, and a casual glance across the canopy often fails to reveal the contours that determine direction and safety. Located near the village of Pluckley in Kent, the forest covers roughly 80 hectares, though its historical significance far outweighs its size, having served for generations as pasture land, hunting grounds, and a network of transport routes long before recreational hiking became common. The sunken tracks, often lined with towering oaks and hornbeams, channel both movement and mystery, guiding visitors in ways that appear straightforward yet conceal sudden depressions, hidden routes, and misleading junctions. Time and weather have deepened the paths, eroded the edges, and allowed undergrowth to reclaim what once was clearly marked, producing a landscape where a single misstep can result in hours of disorientation. Those who enter Daring Woods are often struck by the contrast between its pastoral reputation and the silent menace implied by its terrain, where history and natural processes converge to create paths that seem alive with memory. Soil erosion, repeated trampling, and the passage of livestock over generations carve depressions so profound that some trails now resemble sunken corridors hidden beneath the forest canopy, each groove telling the story of centuries of human and animal movement. Cart ruts, originally shallow enough to serve transportation needs, have deepened as rainwater channels widened them, and frost heaved the soil, producing trenches that can catch an unwary foot or mislead a traveller about direction. Shepherds historically guided flocks along these depressions, but even they reported moments of confusion when the forest shifted subtly underfoot, as if revealing a labyrinth constructed not by walls, but by the persistent effects of time. These hollowed paths are more than simple tracks. They are corridors that distort perception, their depth and shadow casting illusions that can make distances seem longer and bends seem shorter than they are. Understanding Daring Woods requires both historical knowledge and an awareness of how the land itself shapes human experience. Historical accounts from local parishes record early disappearances, including poachers who failed to return from dusk hunts, and children who wandered along the deep ruts and never re-emerged, leaving communities to puzzle over gaps in both record and memory. In the 18th century, parish ledgers note missing individuals with minimal detail, often citing the sunken paths only indirectly as a general hazard of the forest, while some accounts hint at mysterious circumstances, such as tracks that began but never ended, or footprints that circled back to their starting points. These early vanishings, though sparsely documented, contributed to a local awareness that Daring Woods was not a place to enter lightly, particularly alone or after dark. The repetition of such reports over decades reinforced the notion that the forest had its own will, shaping movement and sometimes erasing those who failed to respect its hidden topography. Folklore describes the forest as a place where one might take a single wrong step and find the world subtly shifted, with ghostly figures or murmured warnings echoing along the sunken tracks, and these stories often intersect with practical advice about avoiding depressions or overgrown hollows. Tales circulated of travellers who heard voices calling from unseen corners or glimpsed figures standing where no path existed, prompting caution among those familiar with the wood. These legends, while difficult to substantiate, serve as both warning and narrative reinforcement of the dangers posed by the sunken terrain, illustrating how cultural memory can codify environmental hazard into stories that persist through generations. For modern explorers, such tales heighten the sense of unease and attune attention to subtle cues that might otherwise go unnoticed. The woodland's layout is deceptively simple, with narrow, tree-lined corridors opening unexpectedly into hidden clearings, each drop or rise in terrain capable of disorienting even those familiar with the area. Sunlight filters unevenly through dense branches, creating patches of shadow that can mislead distance judgment, while the forest floor often slopes subtly toward depressions invisible until one is already too close. Moss-covered roots and fallen branches further complicate footing, and small water channels formed over decades by rainfall can transform seemingly solid ground into treacherous soft spots. Even when following marked trails, visitors may experience moments of confusion as the terrain appears to shift underfoot, reinforcing the notion that the forest is not merely a passive space, but an active participant in shaping human movement and perception. During the 19th and 20th centuries, documented cases of disappearances continued, often centred near bends or hollows where erosion had deepened the tracks, leaving searchers puzzled by the forest's ability to conceal its visitors. Reports in local newspapers described poachers or wandering labourers who vanished from one stretch of the sunken path only to be found hours later several hundred metres away, seemingly disoriented yet unharmed, or occasionally never found at all. Such cases created a dual narrative of danger and fascination, compelling both local authorities and curious outsiders to attempt mapping or retracing the sunken tracks. These records also show a pattern. Areas where the terrain dipped sharply or intersected with overgrown hollows were disproportionately associated with disappearance, suggesting that the forest's physical contours played a critical role in the incidents. Archaeologists and soil scientists note that centuries of combined human activity and natural processes created a terrain uniquely prone to disorientation, with depressions and undergrowth masking subtle hazards. Examination of the forest floor reveals stratified layers of compacted soil and sediment deposited over centuries of trampling and water runoff, forming concealed ditches, sinkholes, and hidden hollows. In addition to human influence, natural processes such as tree root expansion, frost heaving, and minor landslides have deepened depressions and altered the apparent orientation of paths. For researchers, the forest is a living archive of interaction between human passage and environmental dynamics, where each sunken track records both a practical history and a potential hazard for the uninitiated. Modern hikers and researchers occasionally report temporary loss of direction, slipping into hidden depressions, or realizing hours later that they have traversed a loop without noticing, a phenomenon the forest seems to encourage. Even with GPS devices, the visual cues of deep hollows, dense undergrowth, and irregular canopy lighting can make orientation unreliable. Visitors describe moments when a path that seems straight suddenly curves, or when a familiar clearing is slightly misaligned, prompting confusion and hesitation. Some anecdotal reports include minor injuries or exhaustion from unintentional extended treks along sunken tracks, emphasizing that Daring Woods continues to exact a physical toll on those who underestimate its subtle complexity. Though navigational aids exist, Daring Woods still carries a sense of unpredictability, its sunken paths, hidden hollows, and layered history testing local experience and technological guidance alike. Conservation efforts and walking guides help reduce risk, but the forest's legacy of erosion, centuries of use, and natural growth ensure that no path is entirely predictable. Walkers who enter the forest are often reminded that, despite its apparent accessibility, the sunken corridors conceal history, hazard, and memory, maintaining a delicate balance between the familiar and the unknowable. This interplay of natural and human-altered terrain sustains the forest's reputation as a place where disappearance is always a quiet possibility, whether literal or perceptual. Beneath the forest floor, the sunken corridors keep their own counsel, allowing only glimpses of what vanishes without explanation. The fading footprints of Mount Mee State Forest, Australia. Visitors to Mount Mee State Forest often remark on how quickly familiar trails seem to vanish beneath moss, leaf litter, and creeping vines, leaving them disoriented despite careful preparation. Nestled in Queensland, Australia, Mount Mee is part of the expansive Dagila Range, its subtropical rainforest stretching across rolling hills, steep gullies, and meandering creeks. For bushwalkers, hikers, and campers, the forest presents a paradox. It is both inviting, with scenic vistas and diverse flora, and deceptively treacherous, capable of turning a familiar path into a labyrinth of obscured trails and hidden dangers. Even brief excursions demand attention, as the dense undergrowth and constant shifting of leaves, mud, and fallen branches can conceal both direction and footing, leaving travellers at the mercy of the forest's subtle complexity. The subtropical rainforest stretches across rolling hills, steep gullies, and meandering creeks, dominated by eucalyptus, lianas, and tangled undergrowth that can conceal both footing and direction. Moss carpets tree roots, while vines twist across narrow pathways, creating natural obstacles that slow movement and obscure familiar reference points. During periods of heavy rain, shallow creek beds swell rapidly, and slick rock formations can appear deceptively stable. The forest canopy filters sunlight into muted green shadows, which can distort perception of distance and slope. As the dense foliage undulates across hillsides and gullies, it is easy for even seasoned walkers to lose orientation, with small deviations compounding over hours until returning to the starting point feels impossible. Local reports and emergency call records document hikers and campers who disappeared without a trace, their last known positions often near hidden creek crossings or isolated ravines. In the late 20th century, several visitors failed to return from short bushwalks, prompting extensive but ultimately inconclusive searches. In some cases, clothing, backpacks or camping gear was found abandoned near muddy banks or tangled undergrowth, offering only fragments of a story never fully understood. These records suggest a pattern. Disappearances frequently occur in areas where terrain shifts suddenly or pathways become narrow and indistinct. The forest, in effect, can erase human passage almost as efficiently as it sustains life. Indigenous oral histories recount areas where spirits are said to guard the land, warning of sudden disappearances, while early European settlers noted travellers who never returned from certain forested stretches. The local Gubi and Jinibara peoples describe sections of the forest where movement is fraught with danger, often characterised by sudden mist, disorienting sounds, or paths that seem to loop back on themselves. European settlers similarly reported missing hunters and loggers in the 19th and early 20th centuries, often leaving behind traces of campsites or personal belongings. These accounts, blending observation with lore, convey practical warnings. Certain areas are easily treacherous, the hazards amplified by the forest's natural density and deceptive terrain. Environmental hazards abound: deceptively soft mud, slippery rocks, hidden creeks, leech-infested bogs, and venomous snakes combine to turn ordinary bushwalking into a potentially perilous undertaking. During rain, creek crossings can transform from shallow trickles into treacherous currents, while the undergrowth conceals sudden drops or tree roots, capable of tripping even the most cautious walkers. In warmer months, leeches and other small predators complicate travel, while snakes, including the eastern brown, may be encountered along hidden paths or fallen logs. These hazards often appear innocuous at first, yet collectively they create an environment where minor misjudgments or overconfidence can lead to serious injury, or worse, disappearance. Mist-laden mornings and dense canopy coverage create optical illusions, while shifting undergrowth quickly erases footprints, confusing both hikers and search parties attempting to retrace paths. A light fog can transform familiar trees into indistinct shapes, and the interplay of shadows can conceal gullies or sudden drops. Fallen branches and dense leaf litter cover the traces of prior footsteps within hours, making traditional tracking nearly impossible. Even with maps and compasses, the forest's subtle visual cues can mislead orientation, leading hikers to double back unknowingly or follow false paths. Such perceptual challenges highlight the forest's ability to disorient and conceal, creating situations where time and direction are uncertain. Overconfidence, fatigue, and the subtle stress of isolation often lead visitors to underestimate the forest's challenges, resulting in navigational errors that can escalate quickly. Bushwalkers may assume they can retrace their steps or reach landmarks they've glimpsed from a distance, only to find those features obscured by mist, undergrowth, or uneven terrain. Physical exhaustion, combined with the forest's sensory complexity, increases the likelihood of missteps or disorientation. Psychologically, the forest exerts a quiet pressure, with the constant visual and auditory stimuli creating unease and subtle confusion that accumulates over hours. Even minor lapses in judgment, when compounded by environmental obstacles, can quickly become critical. Search and rescue teams, along with local volunteers, recount repeated near misses and unexplained delays, with some trails seemingly disappearing overnight due to fallen branches and creeping vegetation. Coordinating a search in Mount Mee requires careful attention to topography, weather, and seasonal changes, as the terrain can shift dramatically from one week to the next. Volunteers report instances where initial tracks vanish or lead to inconclusive locations, forcing teams to adjust plans repeatedly. The combination of natural concealment and terrain complexity ensures that some disappearances remain unresolved for long periods, reinforcing the forest's reputation as a place where human presence can leave little evidence behind. Though warning signs have multiplied and awareness has grown, Mount Mee continues to swallow travellers and erase human traces, maintaining its mysterious and cautionary presence. Local bushwalking clubs and authorities provide maps, guidance and safety advisories, yet new incidents continue to remind visitors of the forest's unpredictability. Even short excursions can test judgment, navigation and attention, demonstrating that preparation does not eliminate risk. The forest's subtropical density, combined with subtle terrain shifts and rapidly changing weather, ensures that Mount Mee's mysteries endure, leaving both locals and visitors with a lingering sense of caution and wonder. In the heart of the forest's verdant interior, each step may fade into nothingness, leaving only questions closely guarded by the trees. The Unreturned of the Nahanni Valley Forests, Canada, Northwest Territories. Towering cliffs and braided rivers carve the Nahanni Valley forests into an expanse where solitude dominates, and any misstep can carry lasting consequences, making the land both magnificent and merciless, a place where even seasoned explorers confront the limits of endurance and navigation. Located in Canada's Northwest Territories, the valley stretches across hundreds of square kilometres, combining boreal forest, steep canyons, and winding rivers that defy prediction, with the South Nahanni River acting as both a lifeline and a hazard. The forest's remoteness has historically shielded it from large-scale settlement, leaving natural processes largely unaltered and paths often defined by centuries of animal tracks and human exploration. For those entering this wilderness, every step requires vigilance, as a seemingly innocuous slope or river crossing can become a trap, concealing disappearances that may never be solved. The combination of breathtaking scenery and inherent danger has fostered both fascination and fear, drawing adventurers while warning them that this is a landscape that claims as easily as it reveals. The dense boreal trees stretch across valleys and plateaus, interrupted by deep canyons and the unpredictable currents of the South Nahanni River, creating a terrain that is nearly impenetrable without experience or guidance. Black spruce, white spruce and trembling aspen dominate the canopy, their roots gripping thin soils along eroded slopes. In summer, the river swells unpredictably, and hidden tributaries can transform stable ground into mud-laden quagmires in moments. Trails, where they exist at all, often follow animal paths that meander through thickets and boulder-strewn sections, offering only the faintest guidance to travellers. The result is a forest that seems deceptively navigable from a distance, but is treacherous in detail, demanding constant attention to footing, orientation and natural cues. Historical records from gold prospectors and trappers recount the early disappearances of men who ventured too far from known routes, vanishing into the forest with only a trail of disrupted vegetation as evidence. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, miners seeking fortune in the Canadian North reported companions lost along riverbanks or in dense timberlands, never to return. Fur trappers similarly disappeared while following beaver or moose tracks into remote regions, leaving empty camps behind. Newspapers and local accounts documented these vanishings with a mixture of concern and resignation, noting the forest's reputation for swallowing those who underestimated its scale or ignored its warning signs. The frequency and consistency of these cases cemented the Nahanni Valley's place as a place of both opportunity and peril, where survival depended on skill, caution and luck. Indigenous oral histories describe spirits and unseen forces inhabiting the forest, cautioning travellers to respect its boundaries and heed the signs that mark areas of danger and disorientation. The Dina and other local groups tell of wandering souls, unusual lights along riverbanks, and voices heard near sudden drops or bends in the landscape, narratives that serve as both spiritual guidance and practical advice. These accounts emphasize the importance of understanding the land, reading natural markers, and travelling with care, recognizing the forest's unpredictability long before modern mapping techniques. For outsiders, such stories may appear symbolic, but for local communities, they encapsulate centuries of accumulated knowledge about a terrain that is alive with subtle but real hazards. Environmental hazards compound the challenge of navigation. Sudden snow squalls, hidden bogs, steep riverbanks, and encounters with moose or wolves can all turn a routine passage into a perilous ordeal. Rivers can rise within hours due to upstream rain sweeping away unprepared travellers, while thick fog in the valley bottom limits visibility to mere metres. Uneven terrain creates opportunities for ankle or leg injuries, and patches of soft peat or decayed organic matter can swallow a foot or trap equipment. Wildlife, while generally avoiding humans, introduces another element of risk, particularly when startled or cornered. These factors combine to make every journey through the Nahanni Valley forests unpredictable, and even minor mistakes can escalate into life-threatening situations. Even in modern times, hikers, geologists and adventure tourists report losing their bearings, sometimes for hours or days, demonstrating that technology cannot fully mitigate the forest's natural complexity. GPS devices fail intermittently under the dense canopy, and compasses occasionally become unreliable due to local magnetic variations. Groups often report returning to points they believed they had passed hours before, or encountering previously unseen obstacles that require detours and backtracking. Survival skills, such as foraging, understanding river behaviour, and recognising subtle landscape features, are critical, but even experienced individuals can find themselves disoriented. The forest's ongoing ability to confound travellers reinforces its reputation as a place where human expectation and natural reality rarely align. Geologists and cartographers attempting to map the region note that shifting river courses, landslides, and dense canopy cover make precise navigation nearly impossible, offering a partial explanation for the persistent disappearances. Seasonal flooding alters riverbanks and uncovers previously hidden crevices, while landslides can wipe out portions of trails and obscure familiar landmarks. Satellite imagery and aerial mapping provide broad overviews, yet on the ground, these tools often fail to account for microterrain challenges such as bogs, treefall, and subtle slope changes. The interplay of dynamic geology and dense forest makes it easy to misjudge distances and orientation, a factor that has consistently contributed to people vanishing without a trace. Isolation, fatigue, and exposure play a critical role in survival, as the valley's remote location delays rescue and magnifies the psychological strain on anyone who strays from established paths. Hypothermia can develop rapidly in damp, windy conditions, while dehydration and exhaustion can impair judgment, making navigation errors more likely. Communication with the outside world is often impossible, leaving lost travellers entirely dependent on their own skills and endurance. Even brief disappearances can become severe due to the difficulty of reaching the forest's more remote areas, reinforcing the perception that the valley is as psychologically demanding as it is physically challenging. Despite increased awareness and modern safety measures, the Nahanni Valley continues to inspire both awe and caution, as the land's unpredictable contours seem to guard its secrets jealously. Today, adventurers equipped with GPS, satellite phones, and detailed maps still approach the forest with careful planning, yet many find that no technology can entirely circumvent the natural complexity. Each canyon, river bend, and densely wooded section holds the potential to disorient or obscure, and the forest's reputation persists as a proving ground for both skill and humility. In this way, the Nahanni Valley forests remain a place where human ambition and natural power intersect in ways that are both compelling and forbidding. In the vast solitude of the Nahanni Valley, those who vanish leave behind no trace, but a silent testimony to a wilderness that yields nothing lightly. The missing ranges of Tongass National Forest, USA, Alaska. Even the most experienced rangers have vanished in Tongass National Forest, a vast Alaskan wilderness where professional skill meets terrain that can defy preparation and expectation. Stretching along the southeastern coast of Alaska, Tongass is the largest temperate rainforest in the world, encompassing nearly 17 million acres of old-growth spruce, hemlock and cedar. Fjords carve deep into the landscape, rivers twist unpredictably through dense undergrowth, and countless islands dot the coastal inlets. For the rangers who patrol its boundaries and researchers who study its flora and fauna, the forest presents a paradox, a managed and studied environment that nonetheless retains a vast, unyielding unpredictability. Each day brings potential hazards both obvious and concealed, from treacherous river crossings to subtle shifts in terrain that can render even the most familiar path unrecognizable. Stretching across nearly 17 million acres, The forest's old-growth trees, fjords, and braided rivers create corridors that can disorient even those familiar with its scale and complexity. The towering canopy filters sunlight into muted green shadows, while thick moss and underbrush obscure both footing and horizon. River deltas shift seasonally, and avalanche-prone slopes can collapse without warning, leaving isolated pockets of forest difficult to traverse or map accurately. Even the most carefully planned patrol routes can become confounding, and a momentary lapse in attention or judgment may send a ranger off course into areas rarely, if ever, travelled. Tongass's sheer size and diversity make it a forest where navigation is a constant challenge, and where human presence is dwarfed by the immensity of the land. Records from the Forest Service document cases of rangers and surveyors who disappeared during routine patrols, wildlife monitoring, or research expeditions, leaving behind only incomplete reports and scattered equipment. In the mid-20th century, several rangers assigned to remote sections of the forest vanished without a trace, despite extensive search operations. Notes and logs recovered from their last known locations hint at normal routines interrupted by sudden misjudgments of river currents or hidden terrain hazards. Modern investigations often revisit these incidents, using GPS and satellite imagery to retrace routes, yet in many cases, the forest itself has shifted enough to erase reliable paths. Such disappearances, while rare, have cemented Tongass's reputation as a forest that tests human endurance and patience in equal measure. Heavy rainfall, sudden flooding, steep avalanche-prone slopes and tidal waterways compound the danger, while dense undergrowth and fallen timber conceal hazards that can halt or redirect a traveller instantly. Rainfall averages more than 200 inches annually in some areas, producing swollen streams and slick, moss-covered surfaces. Low-lying bogs can give way underfoot, and riverbanks, seemingly stable, may collapse without warning. Wildlife, while generally avoiding humans, adds another unpredictable element. A startled bear or moose can force a retreat into more hazardous terrain. These natural challenges combine with the forest's dense canopy and uneven topography, ensuring that even well-trained personnel must constantly adapt and remain alert. Isolation and fatigue weigh heavily, as even trained professionals experience cognitive overload, misjudgments, and the illusion of familiarity in the forest's sprawling, layered terrain. Extended patrols through rugged terrain, coupled with heavy packs and erratic weather, increase the risk of disorientation. Rangers report moments when familiar landmarks seem to vanish or appear in unexpected positions, creating a subtle but persistent sense of unease. Sleep deprivation and mental strain amplify these challenges, sometimes resulting in miscalculations of distance, river depth, or trail continuity. In a forest as vast and intricate as Tongass, even small errors can escalate into critical consequences. Search teams often face months of inaccessible terrain, with river crossings, cliffs, and fog-laden valleys making traditional tracking methods unreliable or impossible. Helicopters, while useful for aerial surveys, are limited by weather, visibility, and dense canopy cover. Ground searches can extend for weeks without success, as the dense forest conceals tracks within hours, and snow or rain can erase evidence. Even experienced searchers describe the forest as a living entity, one that can confound expectations and delay the discovery of both people and their belongings. The combination of inaccessibility and environmental complexity explains why some disappearances remain unresolved for decades. Investigators have noted patterns suggesting that disappearances often occur near rivers, cliffs, and narrow fjord passages, yet no single factor fully accounts for the forest's ability to obscure its victims. Some rangers were last seen crossing glacial streams, while others disappeared near steep ravines or along unmarked backcountry trails. While accidents account for many cases, the lack of consistent evidence leaves lingering questions about what precisely transpired. The forest complexity allows multiple hazards, terrain, water, and weather, to intersect in unpredictable ways, creating circumstances where even a single misstep can become fatal. Modern rangers recount near misses and disorienting experiences, describing moments when familiar landmarks vanish, or riverbeds shift, demonstrating that even contemporary knowledge and equipment cannot fully mitigate the forest's unpredictability. GPS devices occasionally fail under dense canopy, while compasses and maps are not infallible when rivers alter course, or glacial deposits shift the ground. Rangers also describe an acute awareness of sound and light changing in ways that make orientation difficult, Echoes from fjords and the filtered sunlight through dense canopy can mislead perception. These encounters, though often non-fatal, reinforce the forest's persistent ability to challenge human expectations. Despite awareness campaigns and technological aids, Tongass maintains an aura of relentless challenge, where every expedition carries the quiet possibility of being claimed by its scale and complexity. Training, preparation and experience reduce risk, but the forest's unpredictable weather, dynamic waterways and dense old-growth corridors ensure that no patrol is entirely safe. Each disappearance, documented or anecdotal, contributes to a collective understanding that Tongass is not merely a place of work or study, but a wilderness that demands respect and humility. The stories of missing rangers continue to shape policies, training, and the perceptions of those who enter, reminding all that the forest's lessons are exacting. Within the sprawling expanse of Tongass, even those entrusted with its care may vanish as if swallowed by the forest's own patience, leaving only questions in their wake. The lost parties of Rudall River Forest Region, Australia, Western Australia. Small exploration parties and survey teams have vanished along the Rudall River Forest Region, leaving behind campsites and supplies without a trace of those who travelled them. Situated in Western Australia, this semi-arid riverine forest stretches along winding tributaries and isolated waterholes, presenting a paradox of openness and concealment. For travellers, the forest appears navigable, with sandbanks and scattered eucalyptus groves giving the impression of familiarity, yet subtle hazards lie beneath its deceptive calm. Even the most experienced explorers have found themselves disoriented, misjudging the depth of dry creek beds or underestimating the speed at which conditions can change, leaving hours or days lost to the forest's quiet, relentless hold. The semi-arid riverine forest stretches across sparse eucalyptus groves, paper bark-lined waterholes, and rolling sandbanks, where dry creeks can hide sudden drops or deceptively soft mud. Spinifex and acacia shrubs form dense patches that obscure visibility, while fallen branches and scattered rocks can appear stable underfoot but collapse or shift unexpectedly. Seasonal flooding transforms shallow channels into swift, treacherous streams, erasing tracks and altering familiar landmarks within hours. The interplay between arid stretches and water-rich corridors creates a confusing mosaic, where dry trails suddenly disappear into boggy soil or under overhanging branches, challenging even the most attentive observers to maintain orientation. Historical records recount pastoralists and scientific teams disappearing during expeditions in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, often near isolated waterholes or along shifting river courses. Journals from survey parties note the sudden disappearance of colleagues while mapping the Rudall River or collecting botanical specimens, with no signs of struggle or foul play. Occasionally, personal belongings were found scattered near campsites, yet no clear path led away from them. Modern research teams have encountered similar patterns, with individuals or small parties separating from the main group and never returning. The repetition of these incidents across decades suggests the forest itself exerts a subtle, almost imperceptible force of disorientation, amplified by environmental conditions. Hidden gullies, unstable riverbanks, and ephemeral creeks present invisible hazards that can trap or misdirect travellers, sometimes separating groups without warning. Dry creek beds that appear easily crossable can collapse under a person's weight, while narrow gullies may funnel explorers into tight, maze-like formations. In some areas, sandbanks erode overnight, leaving once traversable paths impassable and erasing traces of movement. Waterholes, often assumed to be safe rest points, conceal uneven bottoms or steep drop-offs that can cause injuries, slowing or halting progress entirely. These subtle traps make the forest an unpredictable environment where careful planning cannot guarantee safe passage. Thorny vegetation, dense undergrowth patches, and gravel banks create subtle obstacles that slow movement and erase footprints, leaving parties increasingly disoriented. Acacia and spinifex, common throughout the forest, can tear clothing and impede swift travel, while loose gravel and sand cover traces of human passage almost immediately. Explorers recount how even a short diversion can become compounded over hours, as minor missteps accumulate into significant deviation from intended routes. Footwear can fill with sand or mud, slowing progress, while repeated attempts to backtrack often lead travellers deeper into isolation. In such an environment, the forest itself seems to actively consume the movements of those within it. The forest's visual monotony, coupled with shifting river courses and sandbanks, can mislead even experienced explorers into backtracking unknowingly or following false paths. Overhead, the sparse canopy allows sunlight to scatter unevenly across the ground, creating shifting shadows that distort perception of the distance and slope. Ephemeral creeks, which dry and refill with the seasons, form inconsistent landmarks that confuse navigational memory. A series of small rises and dips in terrain can make one area appear familiar, only to reveal subtle differences that disorient travellers. In combination with the forest's low vegetation and the uniformity of colour in sand and foliage, these factors make retracing steps deceptively difficult. Heat stress, fatigue and overconfidence amplify the risk for small groups, and when combined with isolation, even minor misjudgments can escalate into critical situations. Temperatures in Western Australia's semi-arid regions can rise dramatically during the day, leading to dehydration and cognitive impairment. Explorers attempting to navigate quickly may push beyond safe limits, making poor decisions under physical and mental strain. Group dynamics can exacerbate danger. Disagreements, split decisions, or attempts to continue despite warning signs increase the likelihood of separation or delay. Even when parties are equipped with maps, compasses, or GPS devices, human factors can nullify the advantage of preparation in an environment that subtly erodes confidence and orientation. Search efforts are often stymied by the forest's remoteness, extreme temperatures, and unstable terrain, leaving rescue teams with incomplete trails and elusive evidence. Volunteers and authorities describe tracks that seem to vanish midstream, only to reappear hours later in unexpected locations. Waterholes can conceal clues beneath shifting mud or overgrown reeds, while sandbanks and fallen vegetation hide footprints almost immediately. The combination of limited accessibility and environmental hazards means that search operations are slow and often inconclusive, leaving disappearances unresolved and reinforcing the forest's foreboding reputation. Modern technology has done little to tame the Rudall River forest region, which continues to swallow entire parties and erase the trails they leave behind. Contemporary travellers and research teams alike recount the disorienting qualities of the forest, from minor navigational errors that cascade into lost days to sudden, unanticipated hazards that separate members. Local knowledge passed down through anecdote and warning underscores the forest's subtle dangers. A familiar path today may vanish tomorrow, and the forest's quiet complexity ensures that even small parties can be overwhelmed. In this way, Rudall River Forest retains a persistent, enigmatic presence that humbles those who attempt to traverse it. In this remote, shifting wilderness, even well-prepared groups can disappear without warning, leaving the forest to silently reclaim both travellers and their traces. The vanished travellers of Serra do Mar Atlantic Forest, Brazil. Throughout the Serra do Mar Atlantic Forest, travellers have entered lush valleys and never returned, leaving only whispered accounts and abandoned gear behind. Stretching along Brazil's southeastern coast, this forest forms a vast and continuous belt of tropical rainforest, renowned for its biodiversity but notorious for treacherous terrain. The thick canopy obscures sunlight, and mist often clings to steep slopes and hidden ravines, creating an eerie and disorienting atmosphere. Hikers, researchers, and explorers alike have found themselves losing direction as waterfalls obscure paths and dense vegetation erases even the most careful footprints. For those who venture deep into the forest, beauty and danger exist side by side, each step potentially leading further from safety. Towering trees and dense undergrowth obscure every path, while cascading streams and mist-filled ravines make even familiar trails perilous to navigate. The forest floor is uneven and unpredictable. Fallen branches, tangled roots, and patches of slippery moss conceal dips and sudden drops. Streams that appear shallow can surge unexpectedly after heavy rain, flooding narrow passages and washing away evidence of human presence. Climbers and trekkers report how narrow ridges and precarious slopes demand constant attention, leaving little room for rest or hesitation. Even the most meticulous plans can falter when the terrain shifts with every step, transforming routine excursions into tests of endurance and vigilance. The annals of the 19th and early 20th centuries recount explorers and botanists who disappeared amid their studies of the forest's biodiversity, leaving journals or instruments behind with no explanation. Accounts detail groups mapping new trails or collecting specimens who failed to return to their base camps, with subsequent searches yielding only scattered personal effects. Early settlers reported hearing cries or glimpsing fleeting movements that vanished before investigation. Local folklore began to merge with these accounts, weaving cautionary tales of paths that appear solid one moment and disappear the next. Despite advances in cartography and navigation, the pattern of disappearances has persisted across generations. Modern hikers and eco-tourists continue to face similar fates, disappearing along remote trails where steep slopes and hidden waterfalls quickly erase signs of passage. Organised tours occasionally report members straying from designated paths and vanishing within hours, prompting extensive but ultimately inconclusive search operations. GPS devices and marked trails offer limited protection. The dense canopy often interferes with satellite signals, and fog can reduce visibility to a few meters. Survival experts caution that even brief diversions from known routes can cascade into days of disorientation, emphasizing that human error combined with environmental complexity remains a central risk. Slippery cliffs, sudden drops, and river crossings concealed beneath thick vegetation transform ordinary excursions into dangerous undertakings capable of trapping the unwary. Travellers often misjudge river depths, hidden crevices, or the stability of rocks near waterfalls. A misstep can lead to injuries that prevent further movement, leaving individuals stranded and invisible amidst the forest's dense layers. Observers have noted that ravines and gullies act as natural funnels, pulling travellers into isolated pockets from which escape is exceedingly difficult. These physical hazards, subtle yet pervasive, contribute to the forest's reputation for swallowing entire groups without a trace. The dense canopy and tangled undergrowth conceal snakes, insects, and larger predators, creating an environment where movement is slowed and risk is constant. Venomous snakes and insects remain largely hidden, only revealing themselves when paths are disturbed, while larger mammals, such as jaguars and ocelots, patrol quieter sections of the forest. The constant vigilance required to avoid environmental and wildlife hazards fatigues even experienced trekkers, increasing the likelihood of missteps. Dense vegetation also obstructs lines of sight, allowing travellers to become separated or lose their bearings in moments. In this living maze, the forest exerts a quiet but inescapable influence over those who enter. Heavy rainfall, sudden storms, and persistent fog can turn well-marked trails into vanishing pathways, erasing footprints and disorienting travellers within minutes. Seasonal storms swell rivers and transform small streams into raging torrents, washing away makeshift bridges and paths. Fog can descend rapidly, hiding cliffs and drops, making navigation nearly impossible. Hikers report that landmarks used to orient themselves may appear identical to nearby formations, creating false reassurance and amplifying confusion. In combination with steep terrain and dense vegetation, these conditions can render even experienced explorers invisible to search parties and completely cut off from communication. Even experienced guides and modern navigation tools often fail in Serra do Mar, as shifting terrain and dense foliage obscure maps and landmarks, leaving search parties with limited leads. Local authorities and forest rangers recount hours-long expeditions where GPS units provide inconsistent readings and trails vanish under fallen trees or washed-out earth. Search teams must rely on intuition, knowledge of natural patterns, and careful observation, yet despite these efforts, many disappearances remain unresolved. The forest combination of complexity, unpredictability, and isolation ensures that human preparation alone cannot guarantee safety, reinforcing its enigmatic and dangerous reputation. Ongoing monitoring and safety alerts have done little to change the forest's reputation for swallowing explorers, where natural hazards and environmental intricacies sustain an enduring sense of mystery. Even with warnings, travellers drawn by the forest's allure find themselves at the mercy of steep slopes, hidden ravines, and the relentless growth of the rainforest. The Serra do Mar Atlantic Forest continues to test the limits of human endurance, demanding respect for its subtle dangers and a recognition of how easily the terrain can outmatch even careful planning. Its reputation is not merely folklore, it is grounded in a long history of unresolved disappearances, each one a silent testament to the forest's formidable presence. In the Serra do Mar Atlantic Forest, every step carries the possibility of vanishing entirely, leaving only the verdant jungle and its hidden perils to remember those who dared to traverse its depths. The slipped tracks of Dandeli's Kali Tiger Reserve. India. A small group of trekkers disappeared along a riverside trail, leaving only abandoned gear and faint footprints that vanished into the undergrowth. Dandeli's Kali Tiger Reserve, a rugged forest in southwestern India, contains the trail network where their journey abruptly ended, blending steep riverbanks, dense foliage and hidden ravines into an almost impenetrable landscape. Investigators and local guides who attempted to trace their steps were quickly confronted by the unpredictable nature of the terrain, where every creek crossing and rock-strewn path could conceal unseen dangers. Even within daylight, the forest exerts a disorienting grip, making it nearly impossible to discern the true direction of travel or locate a missing party. Over time, reports of vanished trekkers and forest officials have contributed to a chilling reputation that surrounds this reserve, giving every journey into its depths a silent, foreboding tension. Steep gorges and moss-covered rocks line the Kali River, transforming even short crossings into potentially treacherous passages where one misstep can lead to disaster. Rain-slicked stones and submerged roots make each step uncertain, while sudden drops at the edges of cliffs hide themselves beneath vegetation or water. The river's currents can surge without warning after heavy rainfall, turning a manageable ford into a powerful torrent that sweeps away both equipment and human balance. Hikers who have survived the forest recount moments where they realized too late how quickly the landscape could shift against them, leaving no room for error or hesitation. The intertwining of land and water creates natural traps that are as beautiful as they are deadly, demanding constant vigilance and respect. Historical accounts detail hunters, forest officials, and early surveyors who vanished during routine patrols, leaving behind scattered belongings and unexplained signs of passage. In the 20th century, forest rangers on foot patrol sometimes failed to return from areas known for their rugged slopes and dense canopy. With search teams finding only torn clothing or abandoned tools, hunters seeking elusive game similarly disappeared along narrow ridges or near river crossings, often leaving no clear evidence of their final moments. These earlier disappearances, preserved in official records and local folklore, serve as a warning that human presence alone does not guarantee safety, no matter the experience or skill of those venturing into the forest. Recent hikers and eco-tourists navigating remote trails have similarly disappeared, sometimes within hours of leaving base camps, prompting fruitless searches that only deepen the forest's mystery. Tourism in the reserve has increased over the past decades, bringing groups eager to witness its biodiversity, yet even well-prepared parties have been swallowed by its complexity. Rangers recount that GPS signals often falter under the dense canopy, and fog can descend rapidly, obscuring every familiar landmark. In some cases, entire groups have been separated in moments, leaving only the sound of rushing water or distant animal calls as clues to their last known positions. The forest in effect actively resists human intrusion, rendering even short excursions risky. Narrow cliffside paths, slippery river rocks and fallen trees over rushing water create subtle hazards that can trap or isolate travellers almost instantly. Even experienced trekkers are challenged by the forest's natural obstacles, where a single misstep can mean hours or days of struggle to regain solid footing. Erosion and seasonal storms can shift rocks and tree trunks, altering trails that were familiar only days before. These changes often go unnoticed until they create immediate danger, leaving individuals cut off from paths or descending into hidden gullies. The combination of terrain and environmental unpredictability transforms routine hiking into a carefully calculated challenge where nature dictates both pace and survival. Dense undergrowth conceals not only snakes and insects, but also tigers and leopards, making brief distractions potentially fatal in a forest that offers little margin for error. Venomous snakes, such as Russell's viper and krait, lie hidden under leaf litter, while leopards patrol quietly along ridges and river edges. Tigers, though rarer, maintain territories that occasionally overlap with human paths. The constant presence of wildlife requires vigilance and cautious movement, as even a momentary lapse can result in injury or disorientation. Travellers report a sense of being watched and the difficulty of hearing approaching animals amidst the constant background of rushing water, rustling leaves and birdsong, reinforcing the forest's formidable atmosphere. Monsoon rains and sudden storms can swell rivers, erode trails and shroud the forest in dense fog, quickly erasing footprints and any evidence of human movement. Rainfall can transform shallow streams into raging currents, while fallen leaves and mud obscure all tracks. Heavy mist and low clouds make it difficult to distinguish one ridge from another, and rivers may become unrecognisable from day to day. Search parties find themselves retracing steps that appear identical to previously explored routes, with no signs of the missing beyond ambiguous disturbances in vegetation. Seasonal weather patterns thus compound the forest's natural hazards, creating conditions that are both unpredictable and isolating. Even seasoned guides and modern GPS devices are challenged by the shifting terrain, as eroded trails, hidden ravines, and dense foliage frequently render search efforts ineffective. Rangers and local trackers rely heavily on experience and intuition, yet even they acknowledge the forest's ability to confound expectations. Attempts to coordinate search grids or follow footprints often fail, as the landscape alters subtly but significantly between searches. Trails can vanish beneath fallen branches or newly eroded soil, while water levels and seasonal growth obscure known landmarks. The forest does not yield its secrets easily, and the repeated inability to locate missing individuals reinforces the mystery and danger inherent to the reserve. Warnings, regulations, and even experienced guides have done little to stop the reserve from swallowing travellers, blending natural hazards and human misjudgment into an enduring pattern of disappearances. Tourist researchers and adventurers continue to underestimate the challenges posed by steep terrain, rapid rivers, dense undergrowth, and elusive wildlife. Each new disappearance, while investigated and documented, adds to the accumulating history of unresolved cases, reminding all who enter that preparation and caution are not always enough. The forest remains impartial to fame, skill, or planning, exacting its consequences with silent precision. Its reputation is not folklore, it is a reflection of a living, dynamic wilderness that resists human control. Footsteps fade as if erased from the earth, and only the relentless river and dense forest keep the memory of those who entered Kali Taiga Reserve. The forsaken trails of Lapland's Pallas-Illustunturi forests. Finland. A cross-country skier vanished during a sudden whiteout, leaving only a trail of disturbed snow and abandoned gear to mark where they had been. Pallas-Illustunturi forests, stretching across northern Finland's Lapland region, are known for vast subarctic terrain where blizzards, frozen bogs, and dense coniferous trees conceal every path. In moments, a familiar ridge can be swallowed by drifting snow, leaving travellers disoriented and vulnerable. Rescue teams often find only a patch of disturbed snow or partially buried equipment, evidence of human presence erased almost immediately by Arctic winds. Locals recount similar tales of hikers and skiers who disappeared under the same conditions, their fates remaining unknown despite extensive searches and modern equipment. Snow-laden fells and frozen lakes transform each journey into a labyrinth, where a ridge that appears familiar can vanish beneath drifting snow or a sudden storm. Trails that were clear hours earlier may be buried, leaving no discernible footprints or landmarks to guide the lost traveller. Even when the sky is visible, the uniform whiteness of snow-covered terrain can confuse perception, making distances seem shorter or longer than they truly are. Every crossing over a frozen lake or ice-covered bog carries an unpredictable risk, as hidden cracks or soft snow patches may trap or engulf the unwary. The forest winter environment is unforgiving, reducing even experienced adventurers to vulnerable figures in an endless white expanse. Records from the early 20th century recount explorers and local reindeer herders who never returned from winter excursions, leaving little more than footprints erased by wind and ice. In many instances, search parties recovered scattered personal items, gloves, sleds, and ski poles, but no trace of the individuals themselves. These disappearances, recorded in local archives and passed down in oral accounts, reveal a recurring pattern in which the forest's environmental hazards overpower even the most seasoned travellers. Maps of the area, while useful in summer months, offer little guidance in winter, and natural markers are often obscured or altered by snow accumulation. The region's isolation amplifies these dangers, as help may be hours or even days away. Even modern adventurers are not immune, with hikers and ski tourists occasionally disappearing despite emergency radios, GPS devices, and experienced guides. The Arctic night, intermittent fog, and rapidly changing snow conditions continue to challenge human perception and endurance. Guides who have successfully led dozens of groups sometimes recount the moment when familiar trails become unrecognizable, disorienting even the most prepared explorers. Reports describe hikers who had taken familiar routes but became hopelessly lost within minutes, their distress signals absorbed into the endless white landscape. The forest does not discriminate between local and foreign travellers. Its hazards are impartial, leaving no margin for error. Blizzards can strike with little warning, reducing visibility to near zero and transforming well-marked trails into indistinguishable white plains. These sudden weather events often erase tracks within minutes, confounding even the most meticulous search efforts. Snow can drift over creeks, hiding openings and making solid ground appear continuous, while ice patches disguise dangerous drops or hidden obstacles. Travellers who rely on visual landmarks find them invisible in the storm, while sound carries strangely in the frozen air, further confusing orientation. The forest, in essence, becomes a landscape of mirrors, reflecting human vulnerability to itself in stark, silent warning. Sub-zero temperatures and wind-chilled air create an invisible hazard where frostbite and hypothermia can immobilize travellers before help can arrive. Snowdrifts and ice-covered terrain further complicate movement, and natural shelters are scarce, leaving individuals exposed to relentless Arctic conditions. Even a few hours of exposure can quickly lead to incapacitation, and the body's own exhaustion exacerbates the risk of misjudgment and falls. In winter, rivers and bogs are deceptively frozen, sometimes able to support weight, sometimes collapsing without warning. Every element of the environment, the wind, the cold, the ice, and the snow, acts in concert to test human endurance and survival. GPS signals sometimes fail beneath dense conifers or during heavy snowfall, and maps provide little guidance when familiar landmarks are obscured. Search teams struggle to maintain orientation, often retracing steps multiple times without uncovering any evidence of the missing. Rescue personnel note that even experienced skiers can underestimate the difficulty of navigating in low-light conditions or over uneven snow-covered terrain. Each failed attempt to locate the lost strengthens the forest's reputation as a place where technology and experience are secondary to environmental mastery. Human intervention is limited, and the Arctic forest's silence absorbs all human presence, leaving no clear trace of passage. Wildlife such as reindeer, lynx, and occasional wolves inhabit the forests, yet their presence is largely incidental to the disappearances, which stem more from isolation and environmental hazards. The silence of the Arctic winter amplifies both disorientation and the psychological impact of being alone in a vast, unyielding landscape. Tracks of animals may mislead searchers, while the faint sound of distant creatures can both reassure and unsettle the lost traveller. The constant awareness of being unobserved in such a vast expanse adds to the stress and decision-making pressure on those navigating the forest. Even when not directly dangerous, wildlife contributes to the overall sense of vulnerability and isolation. The Palus Illustanturi forests continue to swallow those who underestimate winter's peril, despite the presence of guides, warnings, and emergency tools, leaving only unanswered trails behind. Each new disappearance, investigated and documented, reinforces the forest's enduring reputation as a place where human misjudgment, environmental extremes, and isolation converge. Winter travellers report an ever-present sense of uncertainty, aware that one miscalculated step or delayed decision can result in vanishing entirely. The forest remains indifferent to skill, experience, or preparation, an impartial arbiter of Arctic survival that has claimed countless lives across decades. In the frozen expanse of Lapland, the forest and snow conspire to erase every trace, leaving only silence to mark the passage of those who never returned. The Lost Watchers of Black Forest, Germany. Fog coils along the valleys, settling thickly among towering pines and cloaking every familiar landmark in uncertainty. The Black Forest, stretching across southwestern Germany, is a dense ancient woodland of hidden streams, mossy undergrowth, and winding trails that can disorient even the most seasoned traveller. Its reputation for concealment is long-standing, a labyrinthine network of hills and gullies that swallow sound and bends light, creating spaces where human presence feels fleeting and fragile. visitors quickly learn that the forest is not merely a backdrop for the lost, it actively reshapes the perception of those who enter it. The air is thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, each inhalation reinforcing the sense that this is a place both alive and indifferent, where movement and stillness intertwine in ways that unsettle the mind. A lattice of shadows shifts continuously across the forest floor, creating illusions of movement and false directions. Paths that seemed obvious can suddenly lead nowhere, and even marked trails can fold into the wilderness as if the forest itself rearranges them. Travellers often recount moments when a bend in the trail suddenly looks identical to another, and once clear stream beds vanish under a haze of ferns and moss. Low-hanging branches and uneven terrain fragment sightlines, while hidden hollows catch sound, turning the footfall of a companion into an echo that seems to come from an entirely different direction. In this environment, the very act of walking can become a mental labyrinth, with the forest as the unseen architect. Accounts from the 1800s tell of hunters and wayfarers who entered the forest and never returned, leaving only scattered belongings or footprints that disappeared into the undergrowth. In one documented case from 1847, a group of local hunters followed a well-known trail to a small glade, only for one member to vanish before reaching a familiar oak clearing. Letters and journals from the time describe the bewilderment of those left behind, noting that search parties combed the surrounding area without finding a single clue beyond the occasional displaced hunting knife or dropped glove. These early disappearances reveal a pattern of vanishing that has persisted through centuries, hinting at a forest that conceals more than it reveals and fostering a reputation for silent, inexplicable absences. Recent incidents mirror these historical mysteries, with hikers, photographers and forest guides occasionally disappearing in fog-laden glades or shadowed valleys. In 2013, a professional wildlife photographer entered the forest to capture images of the rare capercaillie, only to be reported missing hours later. Search efforts located his vehicle and some equipment at the edge of a trail, but no trace of the man himself. Witness accounts often note that those who vanish were last seen on paths considered safe and frequently travelled, emphasising the speed with which orientation, and sometimes life itself, can be erased in this woodland. A thin layer of mist can bend perception, making distances appear closer or further than they truly are. Echoes and muted sounds in the dense forest further disorient travellers, turning every step into a gamble with their own senses. Footsteps can appear to lead back to where one has already been, or a distant shape in the fog may seem to move when nothing could have shifted. The combination of visual deception, auditory distortion, and dense terrain produces an almost hallucinatory effect, leaving individuals questioning their memory, direction, and ultimately their safety. Even those accustomed to wilderness navigation are vulnerable, for the forest manipulates the mind as subtly as it conceals the body. Beneath thick moss and fallen timber lie hidden traps, soft hollows, concealed ravines, and treacherous ground that can swallow a careless step. The Black Forest terrain is deceptively uneven, with shallow depressions and hidden gullies that have claimed countless explorers over generations. One case from 1922 involved a local forester who vanished while checking a small creek crossing. A search found only his boots, sunken into a boggy hollow that had seemed solid. The forest floor conceals both natural and misleading hazards, and the interplay between human error and environmental trickery is a constant threat to anyone navigating these woods. Local folklore weaves an invisible presence into the forest, with tales of watchers, spirits and witches leading wanderers astray. The Schwarzwald has long been a cradle for myth, its dense thickets and shadowed clearings inspiring stories of entities that guide, misdirect, or even claim human lives. Tales speak of phantom figures glimpsed among the pines, of whispers without origin, and of travellers suddenly feeling watched by unseen eyes. These stories, passed down for generations, blend cultural myth with documented disappearances, blurring the line between explanation and fear, and reinforcing the forest's reputation as a realm that resists comprehension. Search parties often retrace their own steps, only to find that landmarks appear shifted, trails vanish, and dense growth conceals all familiar points. Even with modern technology, the dense canopy and rolling terrain challenge GPS signals, while uneven elevation masks visual cues. Rescuers frequently describe a sense of dislocation, as if the forest moves slightly with every attempt to map it. In some cases, footprints appear to lead in circles or abruptly end at improbable locations, leaving search teams puzzled and heightening the forest's aura of mystery. Time and again, the forest swallows those who venture too far, leaving no sign beyond disturbed foliage and faint impressions of human presence. Travellers disappear along side trails, across hidden ravines and into thick groves never to re-emerge. Families, hikers and even experienced guides have reported sudden loss of companions in conditions that superficially should have been safe. Each incident deepens the forest's mystique, reinforcing the idea that it is not merely a collection of trees and paths, but a complex environment where human perception, myth and terrain converge in ways that defy explanation. Shadows linger long after footsteps fade, and those who wander too deeply may become part of the forest's silent record. The Unfinished Roots of Plumas National Forest, USA, California. Ridges rise sharply from shadowed valleys, cutting the forest into fragmented corridors of pine and fir. Plumas National Forest, stretching across northern California, is a vast expanse of rugged mountains, dense woodlands and winding streams, crisscrossed by roads and trails that were never completed. Many of these paths were originally constructed for logging, fire control and early conservation efforts, but changes in priorities, funding or terrain challenges left them abruptly terminated. Today, the unfinished routes create a network of disjointed trails that mislead and confuse even the most experienced forest travellers. The forest itself seems to fold around these paths, reshaping perception and obscuring familiar markers, while the scent of damp pine and decomposing leaves clings to every step, grounding the forest in a timeless, enigmatic presence. Tracks meant to guide travellers often dissolve into brush, leaving walkers to rely on intuition and luck. Old maps sometimes fail to indicate where roads abruptly end, and seasonal growth conceals once clear markers. Trails that appear to stretch straight for miles can unexpectedly fade into dense undergrowth or merge imperceptibly with neighbouring tracks. Hikers report moments when a path seems familiar, only to circle back to a previously traversed clearing, or when a shallow streambed appears to lead onward, but vanishes into a bed of ferns. The constant interplay between visible and hidden routes transforms each journey into a mental exercise, where confidence can quickly become disorientation, and curiosity turns to apprehension. Archival reports from the 1960s and 1970s detail hikers, campers, and forestry personnel who disappeared along these unfinished routes. One case involved a young ranger tasked with inspecting an old fire trail near a steep ridge. He never returned, and the search yielded only scattered gear and a faint trail of footprints that abruptly ended in a grove of dense firs. In 1978, a family hiking along a mapped route found themselves disoriented after a series of intersecting tracks caused them to lose their bearings. They were eventually rescued after 2 days, but the incident reinforced the forest's capacity to conceal and confuse. Even decades later, local authorities reference these disappearances when advising visitors to stick to well-established trails and to carry detailed maps and navigational equipment. Contemporary incidents echo these historical mysteries, demonstrating that the forest remains as perilous as ever. In 2015, a lone hiker vanished along a section of abandoned logging roads, despite being equipped with a GPS device and emergency supplies. Search teams found his vehicle parked neatly at the forest edge, but the trail he was reportedly following had been partially reclaimed by forest growth, rendering it nearly indistinguishable from surrounding vegetation. Another recent case involved a birdwatcher who disappeared while photographing the canopy in a secluded glade. Only a camera and notebook were recovered months later. These modern vanishings highlight how even in the age of technology, Plumas National Forest continues to challenge human perception and defy expectations of safety. Hidden dangers lurk beneath dense undergrowth and loose soil, where ravines, fallen logs, and unsteady rock formations make progress treacherous. Forest roads left incomplete often skirt these hazards, only to terminate suddenly at an unstable incline or a boggy depression. Seasonal rainfall exacerbates the risk, softening the ground and making previously stable paths dangerous. Explorers report that deceptive appearances are common. A flat surface may conceal a sudden drop, while a dry creek bed may hide deep pools or slippery moss-covered stones. The convergence of incomplete human-made routes and natural obstacles creates an environment where even cautious steps can lead to misfortune, reinforcing the forest's quiet reputation for danger. Even seasoned guides can be disoriented by shifting terrain, variable weather, and misleading trail markers. Fog can settle rapidly in the valleys, reducing visibility to a few feet, while snow in winter can obliterate tracks. Storms and sudden winds strip bark from trees and deposit debris across paths, altering landmarks that hikers might rely upon. Seasonal rivers, swollen by rainfall or snowmelt, occasionally submerge sections of abandoned roads, rendering previously navigable trails impassable. The forest's unpredictable climate, combined with a labyrinth of unfinished routes, ensures that human confidence is often tested, sometimes with fatal consequences. Local lore adds another layer to the forest's reputation, recounting travellers who vanished without a trace, or returned with stories of disorienting trails and strange sounds. Residents speak of muffled voices echoing through ridges, fleeting figures glimpsed between the trees, and the sensation of being watched along isolated paths. While these accounts are anecdotal, many correspond to areas with historical disappearances, suggesting that folklore and fact coexist in the forest narrative. Whether these tales are exaggerations, misperceptions, or reflections of genuine environmental phenomena, they contribute to the forest's sense of living mystery, where human understanding seems continually limited by the landscape itself. Rescue operations frequently encounter unexpected complications, from unreliable communications to trails that appear and vanish underfoot. Search teams often report that GPS devices lose accuracy under the dense canopy, while the forest topology can lead them in circles despite careful planning. Abandoned roads, partially hidden by moss and shrubs, can mislead teams into dead ends or trap them in areas that were never fully surveyed. Even aerial reconnaissance is challenged by the forest's undulating ridges and dense foliage, emphasizing how both human and technological effort can fall short against the forest's natural complexity. Patterns emerge over decades, suggesting that specific regions, seasonal conditions, or terrain features are consistently linked to disappearances. Certain ridges, glades, and intersecting paths have repeatedly been the sites of missing persons reports, yet no single factor accounts for all incidents. Whether human error, environmental hazards, or the deceptive layout of unfinished routes is responsible, the forest maintains a persistent enigma. Even with accumulated experience, maps, and modern equipment, Plumas National Forest preserves its capacity to disorient, to obscure, and ultimately to claim those who underestimate its challenges. Even where roads end abruptly and landmarks dissolve into forest, Plumas guards its secrets with quiet persistence, and some paths may never reveal their stories. The Gone Without Warning in Dartmoor Forest, England. On mist-laden mornings, the sound of bells from distant farms carries across Dartmoor, yet some travellers report echoes that seem impossibly close, as though the land itself bends sound in ways the mind cannot comprehend. The moor sprawls across roughly 954 square kilometres in Devon, England, a landscape of granite tors, undulating heath, and peat bogs that can shift overnight with rain or frost. Dartmoor's environment is harsh and beautiful, a place where centuries of human presence intersect with nature's indifference, leaving countless stories half-formed and unresolved. Ancient stone circles and remnants of Bronze Age settlements pepper the high ground, standing as silent witnesses to generations of humans who have walked, laboured, and sometimes disappeared here, leaving the land to reclaim what was briefly theirs. Bronze Age farmers carved fields into the slopes and built stone rows and circles that still catch the morning fog, yet even these markers are entwined with mystery. Medieval documents and parish records occasionally mention individuals who went missing while tending flocks or transporting goods along narrow tracks between hamlets, some never seen again. In one such account from the 16th century, a farmer crossing a valley between two tors failed to arrive at his destination. Search parties found his cart abandoned, wheels half sunken into the soft soil, but no other trace of him was ever discovered. These historical disappearances suggest that Dartmoor's reputation as a place where people inexplicably vanish is not a modern phenomenon but a persistent feature of its human and natural history. The terrain itself seems deliberately deceptive. Granite tors such as Hayter, Hound Tor and Saddle Tor rise abruptly from the heath, casting long shadows that shift with the sun creating an ever-changing visual landscape. Peat bogs and mires are scattered across lower valleys, often deceptively firm at the edges yet unstable beneath, able to swallow boots, tools, or a single misstep. Rivers such as the River Dart and River Tavy wind through hidden gullies, and after heavy rainfall, channels can expand or change course overnight, rendering known paths unreliable. Dense fog frequently descends from the high ground, erasing sightlines and muffling sound, so that even familiar landmarks vanish within moments. In such conditions, the moor becomes a three-dimensional puzzle, where orientation is unreliable, and the simplest route can lead to disorientation or peril. Modern disappearances continue to confound authorities. In the 20th century, hikers, tourists, and residents have walked along well-marked tracks only to vanish without leaving footprints beyond a brief trail or abandoned belongings behind. A notable case from the 1970s involved a group of walkers traversing a popular ridge near Hound Tor. One member separated briefly from the group and was never seen again. Extensive searches by the police and local volunteers yielded nothing except a discarded map lying face down in the heather. In other instances, missing individuals have been found later, at unusual distances from where they were last seen, as though the forest itself redirected them before erasing all other traces. Rescue and search efforts in Dartmoor are notoriously challenging. Teams must contend with sudden fog, heavy rain, and shifting undergrowth, while the terrain's sheer variety, from exposed tors to marshy lowlands, can make movement slow and hazardous. Volunteers often note that footprints disappear quickly on the soft peat or are camouflaged by fallen leaves and moss. Even helicopter surveys can be inconclusive. The forested valleys and rocky outcrops obscure the landscape from above, hiding objects that would otherwise be visible on flatter terrain. The combination of natural hazards, unpredictable weather, and isolated terrain has made Dartmoor a place where disappearance can occur in a matter of minutes and leave almost no evidence behind. The forest's folklore deepens its enigmatic reputation. Locals tell stories of the hairy hands, spectral figures said to seize the steering wheel, of passing motorists or the hands of walkers, forcing them off course, and of will-o'-the-wisps, ghostly lights that lure travellers into bogs and marshes. While authorities regard these tales as legend, the stories persist because they intersect with genuine reports of sudden confusion, strange lights or inexplicable sounds that accompany several disappearances. Oral histories handed down through generations often describe travellers who walked into the mist and were gone, suggesting that Dartmoor's mysteries are both natural and cultural, rooted in the landscape while reinforced by human storytelling. Patterns emerge in accounts of those who vanish. Many report sudden vertigo, disorientation, or altered perception of time and distance when crossing certain valleys or approaching particular tors. Psychologists studying the area suggest that the combination of fog, wind, and monotonous terrain can induce a form of spatial disorientation, sometimes called lost in familiar terrain syndrome. Yet the concentration of disappearances in certain areas, such as around Saddle Tor or near the East Dart River, defies simple statistical explanation, implying that the forest configuration may play a more complex role than mere topography. Despite technological advancements, Dartmoor remains resistant to human understanding. GPS devices, mobile phones, and guided excursions do not always prevent confusion or disappearance. Hikers still report moments where signals vanish or compasses spin inexplicably. Local search and rescue coordinators emphasise that even experienced walkers must respect the moor's unpredictable nature, and that careful preparation is only one part of ensuring safety. Each unresolved case reinforces the forest's reputation as an environment where modern tools offer no absolute protection, and where the interplay of history, terrain, and climate continues to confound logic. In twilight, the tors and bogs take on a muted, almost spectral quality, and the stone circles from the Bronze Age catch the fading light in ways that seem deliberate, as if guiding or warning the unwary. The forest stillness, punctuated by distant bird calls or the rush of wind over exposed rock, conveys a quiet authority that cannot be challenged. Visitors often leave with the uneasy sense that the forest is aware of their presence, that it retains knowledge of all who have entered and not returned, and that its mysteries are neither random nor easily solved. Past the limits of mapping and memory, a single traveller ventures into the mist, while Dartmoor keeps a silence that refuses to be disturbed. The Lost Prospectors of Pine Barrens, USA, New Jersey. In the early 1800s, prospectors and settlers trudged through the sandy stretches of the Pine Barrens, drawn by promises of iron, glass, and hidden wealth, yet some never emerged from the dense pine groves they sought to tame. The region spans roughly 1.1 million acres across southern New Jersey, a vast expanse of pitch pine forests, cedar swamps, and cranberry bogs that confound even seasoned explorers. Early maps depict winding rivers such as the Mullica and Batstow carving through the landscape, while smaller creeks and hidden bogs break up otherwise navigable terrain. Settlers and prospectors alike spoke of the forest's uncanny silence, the way footsteps seemed muffled by sand and moss, and the disorienting sameness of the pine trees that stretches for miles, making direction nearly impossible to maintain. The Barrens quickly earned a reputation not merely as a resource-rich region, but also as a place where the land itself could confuse, trap and erase those who ventured too far. Iron furnaces and glassworks sprang up across the forest in the 18th and 19th centuries, producing tools, household goods, and decorative objects that fueled local economies. Cranberry farmers carved canals and drained bogs to harvest fruit, moving through the same dense forest that had long confounded prospectors. Daily life required constant movement along narrow trails, often with little indication of where safe footing ended and treacherous ground began. Workers were known to carry axes, shovels, and lanterns, yet these tools offered only minimal protection against bogs that could swallow a foot or more without warning. Historical records include cases of labourers who failed to return from routine trips to check waterways or gather timber, disappearing with no signs of struggle or foul play, leaving only abandoned equipment and footprints that seemed to fade mid-step. The geography of the Pine Barrens itself is an obstacle to both navigation and rescue. Sandy soil shifts underfoot, creating subtle variations that make paths difficult to trace. Hidden bogs and cedar swamps conceal treacherous pockets of water and vegetation, while streams wind unpredictably, sometimes appearing where maps indicate dry land. Thick stands of pitch pine create a repetitive visual pattern that can disorient even those with local knowledge, while the low elevation and flat expanses allow heat to build quickly in summer and fog to linger in winter. The combination of hidden water, uneven ground, and monotony of terrain contributes to a sense that the forest is alive, subtly guiding travellers away from familiar routes and leaving them to stumble through the wilderness without a clear reference point. In the Barrens, disappearance patterns show a remarkable consistency. Prospectors, hunters, cranberry workers and later hikers have been reported missing along trails that should be straightforward. Accounts from the 19th century describe ironworkers walking to nearby rivers and never returning, with their tools found abandoned in the undergrowth. In the 20th century, hikers venturing off marked paths sometimes vanished entirely, with searchers only finding abandoned packs or a lantern dimly glowing in the distance. Even when victims are eventually located, they're often found far from where they were last seen, as though the forest redirected them across miles of bogs and sand without leaving any traceable path. The randomness of these disappearances compounds the mystery, as if the forest operates according to its own hidden logic. Search operations in the Pine Barrens are notoriously difficult. Dense pine and cedar stands limit visibility, while bogs and swamps conceal footprints almost immediately. Rescue teams have repeatedly encountered areas where even well-trained trackers lose their bearings, and rivers that appear shallow or navigable can be deceptively deep or rapidly flowing in certain seasons. Coordinated searches may last days, sometimes weeks, with minimal results, further reinforcing the forest's reputation as a place that resists human control. The sheer scale of the Barrens, combined with its complex network of waterways and hidden hazards, ensures that the land itself often dictates the outcome of any search. Environmental factors compound the dangers of the Barrens. Summer heat can rise quickly under the pine canopy, while humidity makes each step laborious, draining energy and impairing judgment. In winter, fog settles low across bogs, masking depressions and altering perceptions of distance. Many travellers report the sense of moving in circles or encountering the same landmark repeatedly, a phenomenon caused by repetitive topography and uniform vegetation. Disorientation, dehydration and exhaustion combine in a way that can make even brief excursions into the forest hazardous, turning a routine path into a test of survival where the forest silently enforces its own rules. today's explorers remain vulnerable to the forest's subtle hazards. Hikers, hunters, and cranberry workers continue to report instances of losing their bearings, sometimes for hours at a time. GPS devices, cell phones, and marked trails provide some safety, but dense canopies and deep swamps occasionally block signals, leaving travellers isolated. Even guided excursions have noted moments when participants became inexplicably separated from the group, emerging in locations that defied logic. These ongoing events underscore that, despite technological advances, the Pine Barrens retains a capacity to confound and challenge humans who underestimate its complexity. As evening descends, the pines and cedar swamps darken into indistinct shapes, and the river's soft murmurs become the dominant sound. The forest is alive in subtle ways, a faint rustle of needles, a splash in a distant bog, the whisper of wind across sand. It holds centuries of human effort, countless footsteps and innumerable vanishings in its memory, patient and unyielding, a landscape that has always demanded respect and vigilance from those who enter. Away from any path or signal, a prospector's boot sinks into the bog's hidden depths, while the Pine Barrens holds its stillness. The missing hikers of Crooked River National Forest, USA, Oregon. A hiker rounding a familiar bend in the Crooked River Trail sometimes reports that the rocks, the trees, or even the river's edge appear subtly changed, as though the canyon itself has shifted overnight. Crooked River National Forest, stretching across central Oregon, is defined by its rugged basalt gorges, cliffs, and a network of narrow canyons carved by centuries of flowing water. The trails that wind along the river rim or descend into the canyon floors are deceptively simple in appearance, yet each bend, ledge, or shadow can mask dangers that lurk just out of sight. Travellers often note the quiet intensity of the forest, where the whisper of wind through pines and the distant rush of the river create a sense of isolation, emphasizing how easily the landscape can absorb those who are unprepared or momentarily distracted. Deep basalt gorges dominate the terrain, and mixed conifer forests cling to the canyon walls, creating pockets of dense shade where light rarely penetrates. Loose scree, fallen boulders, and steep inclines complicate movement, while the Crooked River winds unpredictably, forming narrow passageways that disappear beneath overhanging cliffs. Seasonal variations intensify the forest's challenges. Spring snowmelt swells the river and saturates slopes. Summer heat can render upper trails exhausting, and autumn fog conceals the edges of cliffs and riverbanks. The interplay of geological formations and vegetation produces a maze-like environment where even experienced hikers can misjudge distance, orientation, or the stability of the ground beneath them. Flash floods can appear with little warning, sweeping across canyon floors and altering riverbanks within hours. Crumbling ledges and rock slides claim footing in seconds, and the forest's narrow channels amplify sound, creating disorienting echoes that make distant voices or moving water seem closer or farther than they actually are. A single misstep along a rim trail can carry a hiker beyond view of companions or rescue personnel, leaving no trace on the hard basalt and loose soil that cover the canyon floor. The combination of unpredictable water, steep terrain, and deceptive acoustics turns the forest into an environment where nature silently enforces its own rules. Local Forest Service records recount hikers who vanished along well-used rim trails, leaving backpacks, boots, or water bottles behind. In several cases, groups reported one member separating for only a few minutes before they were never seen again, despite coordinated searches over days. On occasion, hikers have been found hours later, disoriented in canyons far from their last known location, sometimes with injuries caused by minor falls or rock scrapes that indicate no deliberate accident. The suddenness and apparent randomness of these disappearances create patterns that defy easy explanation, hinting at the subtle, confounding influence of the forest itself. Search and rescue efforts are frequently hindered by the forest's structure. Narrow canyon walls and dense trees limit visibility, while fallen rocks and underbrush hide tracks almost immediately. Helicopters cannot penetrate every gully, and the river often blocks access to paths that seem nearby on maps. Volunteers and professionals alike recount moments where obvious routes vanish under shadow or unexpected terrain shifts, leaving search parties forced to retrace miles through confusing networks of gullies and cliffs. Even the most systematic approach is challenged by the forest's ability to conceal evidence of human presence. reinforcing its reputation as an environment that operates on its own terms. Psychological and navigational factors contribute further to the danger. The repetition of cliffs, ledges and tree patterns can create a sense of moving in circles, while echoing canyon walls distort sound, making distances and directions difficult to judge. Hikers report fleeting illusions of landmarks appearing closer or farther than they are, and the constant verticality of the terrain can induce vertigo or misjudgment of footing. The forest combination of visual and auditory confusion, along with physical fatigue, makes even short excursions into the canyon prone to error, especially for those who underestimate its subtle, cumulative challenges. Marked trails, GPS devices and cell phones provide little immunity. Hikers, backpackers and climbers still encounter these hazards. Reports persist of temporary disappearances, moments of sudden disorientation, or hikers straying off trail only to reappear far from their expected location. Even guided excursions have noted instances where individuals briefly vanish from view, sometimes re-emerging in areas that defy explanation. These incidents highlight that the Crooked River National Forest, while documented and mapped, retains a capacity to confound perception and control, reminding visitors that preparation alone cannot guarantee safety. Twilight transforms the canyon into a landscape of stark contrasts. Shadows deepen along the basalt walls. The river murmurs from the depths below, and the wind whistles through the pines, carrying sounds that seem amplified and distorted. The forest conveys an almost sentient quiet, as if every twist of the river and every shadowed ledge holds knowledge of past footsteps, missteps, and disappearances. For those who pause to observe, the canyon's scale and intricacy create an uneasy awareness of human vulnerability, a reminder that the terrain itself can be as elusive and unpredictable as the hikers it sometimes claims. On the twisting floor of the canyon, a solitary backpacker veers from the path, and the crooked river remains still, hiding secrets that may never come to light. The untracked departures of Barrington Tops Forest, Australia, New South Wales. Rolling plateaus rise abruptly into steep escarpments, where snow gum and eucalyptus forests spread across high-altitude terrain, interrupted by narrow rivers and rocky outcrops that shape the land into a complex, uncharted maze. Barrington Tops National Park, part of the World Heritage-listed Gondwana rainforests, spans roughly 32,000 hectares of rugged wilderness in New South Wales, and its sheer scale makes even well-travelled paths feel remote. Vegetation varies dramatically, from open plateaus to dense subalpine rainforest pockets, while the occasional creeks and rivulets cut twisting channels that complicate navigation. The sheer isolation and changing elevations create a landscape that challenges perception, giving the impression that a hiker could wander endlessly without fully understanding the forest's expanse. Deep gullies and hidden valleys thread through this plateau, and ancient vegetation thrives in secluded patches where human presence is scarce. Snow gum trees rise in clusters on rocky ridges, their pale trunks contrasting against the dark green canopy of eucalypt forest below. Rivers carve intricate courses through the terrain, at times vanishing under overhanging rocks or dense undergrowth, only to resurface in quiet pools. For anyone attempting to traverse these plateaus and valleys, the forest topography provides a labyrinthine environment where landmarks can appear deceptively familiar, yet the paths between them shift subtly with fallen trees, eroded banks, or seasonal river flow. Ancient aboriginal pathways and remnants of early timber logging trace hidden routes through the plateau, evidence that human presence has long existed alongside the forest's persistent isolation. Today, these subtle traces are often overgrown and barely discernible, yet they reveal that Barrington Tops has been traversed for centuries despite its apparent remoteness. The area supports a remarkable diversity of wildlife, from wallabies and wombats navigating rocky gullies, to elusive lyrebirds whose calls echo through subalpine gullies. Even small ephemeral streams host populations of native freshwater fish, while mosses and lichens cling to rock faces, quietly documenting centuries of shifting climate. This intertwining of human history and ecological richness creates a forest where the ordinary act of walking can unknowingly intersect with hidden paths, wildlife encounters, and terrain features that contribute to sudden disorientation and untracked departures. Seasonal extremes further complicate travel. Winter snow blankets the upper plateaus, sometimes lingering into late spring, creating slippery trails and obscuring natural markers. Summer storms can arrive without warning, turning dry paths into rivers of mud and swelling creeks to dangerous currents. Even minor temperature changes can make footing treacherous on the rocky escarpments, and steep slopes collect water in ways that are difficult to anticipate from above. For anyone moving through the high plateau, a trail that seems secure in the morning can become perilous by afternoon, emphasizing how quickly the forest conditions can shift. Official records recount hikers, bushwalkers and researchers who vanished across Barrington tops, often along established routes. Some disappearances involved only a single person, while others occurred in small groups, leaving behind gear, backpacks or shoes, yet yielding no clue to the individual's final movements. Reports suggest that even experienced explorers, familiar with the terrain, can vanish in moments, their last known location sometimes near recognizable ridges or creeks, only for searchers to find empty paths and undisturbed forest in their wake. These cases suggest a pattern of rapid, unexplained departures, as if the forest itself conceals the precise moment a traveller becomes untracked. Rescue efforts are frequently hindered by the plateau's natural defences. Rugged escarpments and narrow gullies limit accessibility, while dense undergrowth and fallen logs conceal trails almost instantly. Some areas remain unreachable except by specialised climbing or aerial operations, forcing search teams to prioritise certain zones over others. Weather adds another layer of complication. Fog can descend within minutes, and rain or snow can obscure tracks left hours before. Even coordinated search efforts across multiple days can yield little evidence, reinforcing the forest's reputation as a place where the land resists human intrusion. Uniform forest expanses and repetitive ridge patterns often distort perception, making navigation inherently difficult. Hikers can misjudge distances or believe they are approaching landmarks that remain frustratingly out of reach. Mist rising from valleys, cloud cover over the plateau, and shadows cast by steep escarpments further disorient travellers, sometimes causing them to retrace their steps unknowingly. In such conditions, even those equipped with maps and GPS devices may find that the forest subtly rearranges itself around them, producing a sense that familiar terrain has transformed in an imperceptible but critical way. Although hazards persist, Barrington Tops continues to attract explorers eager to witness its biodiversity, majestic views and outdoor possibilities. Bushwalkers, climbers and researchers frequently report sudden disorientation or temporary loss of companions along well-marked trails. Adventure tourism groups sometimes witness individuals returning from short excursions with no recollection of certain sections of the plateau, while in rarer cases, hikers simply fail to return. These contemporary incidents underscore that, despite technological advances and greater knowledge of the terrain, the plateau's capacity to confound and conceal remains unchanged. As daylight wanes, shadows deepen across the plateau, highlighting ridges, gullies and river channels with a stark contrast. Streams glint faintly through the undergrowth, and the muted hum of the forest conveys both quiet isolation and persistent motion, as if the trees and rocks themselves hold memory of every traveller who has passed. The vast openness of the plateaus juxtaposed with hidden valleys produces a sensation of endless expanse, amplifying the forest's enigmatic presence and the awareness that, in such terrain, one could be untracked without realising it. A lone hiking boot lies wedged between rocks on a remote ridge, and Barrington Tops keeps the fate of its missing travellers buried within its vast, unyielding expanse. The absorbed explorers of Doi Inthanon Forest, Thailand. The constant murmur of waterfalls and rushing streams threads through Doi Inthanon, creating a soundtrack that both guides and confuses those navigating its dense jungle trails. The forest, part of Thailand's highest national park, stretches across steep slopes and deep valleys, its dense vegetation forming a near-impenetrable canopy. Trails carved by centuries of local use wind through towering trees and rocky outcrops, yet many paths are seldom trodden by modern hikers, leaving large sections of the forest virtually untouched. The interplay of rushing water, uneven ground and sudden drops creates an environment where a simple misstep can quickly turn a routine trek into a perilous venture. Hidden valleys and steep slopes shape the highland forest into a labyrinth of rivers, cliffs and dense undergrowth. making even short treks unexpectedly complex. Small rivulets snake through moss-covered rocks, while waterfalls crash into pools that glint faintly through the shadows. The jungle's thick undergrowth often conceals natural markers, and fallen trees create barriers that force travellers to make unexpected detours. In this intricate terrain, hikers can traverse a few hundred metres without realising how far they have drifted from a trail, giving the forest an uncanny ability to absorb anyone who moves through it. Ancient trails and remnants of local settlements hint at the forest's long history of human use, though most are overgrown or hidden beneath dense vegetation. Indigenous Karen communities once relied on these paths for hunting and gathering, and some continue to live in scattered villages at the forest's fringes. Archaeological traces, such as stone steps and terrace slopes, remain as subtle markers of human presence, but their obscured condition can confuse even the most prepared explorers. Wildlife, gibbons swinging through the canopy, hornbills calling from high branches, and camouflaged insects, adds another layer of complexity, often masking sound cues and footprints that might guide searchers or hikers. Sudden monsoon rains drench trails and swell rivers, turning familiar paths into slippery and unpredictable obstacles. Heavy precipitation can trigger landslides, while previously shallow streams can become raging torrents in minutes. Even during the dry season, shaded gullies retain moisture, creating slippery surfaces that hide natural hazards beneath moss and leaves. The combination of humidity, rainfall, and steep terrain makes the forest particularly dangerous for those unfamiliar with its rhythms, and many reported disappearances coincide with these volatile conditions. Forest rangers and local authorities have recorded trekkers who vanished along marked routes, leaving behind equipment without any trace of their movements. Some individuals were experienced hikers, guided by maps and GPS devices, yet still disappeared within hours. Others left behind personal items such as backpacks, tents, or water bottles, found in locations that did not correspond to any known trail. Patterns suggest that certain valleys and cliff edges are especially hazardous, but the forest's complexity defies simple explanation, and even areas frequently traversed by locals have claimed explorers. The combination of dense jungle, precipitous cliffs, and fast-moving rivers creates hazardous conditions for search efforts, with cloud cover further hindering aerial surveys. Helicopter searches may be thwarted by low-hanging clouds, and ground teams must contend with difficult terrain and hidden ravines. Some areas are accessible only by climbing steep slopes or fording treacherous rivers, limiting the ability to conduct thorough investigations. In many cases, searchers conclude with no evidence of the missing, reinforcing the forest's reputation as a place that can erase the traces of those who enter. Orchids, rhododendrons, and endemic ferns thrive in shaded gullies, their vibrant colours standing out amid the dark green canopy. Birds, gibbons, and other wildlife move silently through the treetops, often masking subtle human tracks or sounds. Even small streams are inhabited by native freshwater species, while the uneven ground hosts snakes, insects, and other creatures that can surprise travellers. These ecological intricacies add both beauty and danger, creating a forest where every step interacts with an environment that is both alive and indifferent. The forest's uniform undergrowth, echoing streams, and shadowed river valleys can warp perception, causing trekkers to misjudge direction or distance. Paths may appear familiar, but lead travellers in circles, while the constant sound of flowing water and cascading waterfalls can create auditory illusions, misleading explorers about the location of trails or landmarks. Disorientation is compounded by dense vegetation that restricts line of sight, making navigation reliant on memory and instinct as much as on maps or GPS signals. Annually, explorers of all kinds, scientists, eco-tourists, and trekkers venture into Doi Inthanon, confronting disorientation, unpredictable river crossings, and vanishings that reflect the forest's long-held enigmas. Even organised groups have reported losing track of members for hours, only for them to reappear or vanish entirely without explanation. Scientific expeditions studying cloud forest ecology face similar challenges, noting that terrain, weather, and dense vegetation frequently complicate movement and obscure even well-marked paths. Dusk casts a glow over wet leaves, and distant waterfalls carry their echoes across the slopes, producing a rhythm that reflects both the forest's serene beauty and its concealed dangers. The interplay of light and shadow, the rush of water, and the dense jungle create an atmosphere in which every sound and movement carries heightened significance. and the forest's scale fosters a sense of constant uncertainty. A weathered trekking pole leans against a moss-covered boulder, and Doi Inthanon guards the fate of its explorers within the shadows of its towering cliffs and hidden gullies. The Vanishing Pilgrims of Kolmården Forest, Sweden. Centuries-old paths wind through Kolmården Forest, their stones worn smooth by pilgrims whose footsteps have long faded into the dense Scandinavian woodland. The forest spans rolling hills, rocky ridges and boggy hollows, creating a landscape both beautiful and treacherous. Sunlight filters unevenly through conifers and birches, casting long shadows across moss-covered rocks and fallen logs, while narrow trails carved by generations of travellers twist unpredictably among the trees. For those who attempt to navigate the forest today, it is easy to underestimate the subtle ways Kolmården can absorb the unwary, transforming familiar markers into disorienting terrain. Rolling hills give way to rocky ridges and scattered bogs, while narrow streams thread through the undergrowth, carving hidden channels that can mislead travellers. Paths may appear clear from a distance, yet small depressions or hidden streams can change footing in an instant. The forest conceals slopes that seem gentle until they abruptly drop into shallow valleys, and bogs, sometimes invisible beneath a cover of moss and leaves, can trap or divert anyone crossing them. These features have claimed both pilgrims following medieval routes and modern hikers attempting to explore the forest's quiet depths. Winters bring short days and heavy snow, turning familiar routes into white expanses where every rock and tree is transformed into an unfamiliar obstacle. Ice forms on rocks and tree roots, while snowfall can obscure trail markers entirely. Even in late autumn, freezing nights may leave the forest floor slick with frost, making footing treacherous on ridges and near streams. Fog, though less constant than in mountain regions, sometimes settles in valleys, further limiting visibility and giving the landscape a deceptive uniformity that can disorient travellers. Documents note travellers who vanished while walking these ancient trails, sometimes leaving items behind with no sign of themselves past a single bend. Accounts from the 17th and 18th centuries describe pilgrims en route to nearby churches who failed to arrive, their last known positions recorded only in parish logs. In modern times, hikers equipped with maps and GPS devices have disappeared under similar circumstances, sometimes leaving behind water bottles, backpacks or shoes, with no other signs of struggle or footprints leading away. Patterns suggest that certain bogs, ridges and river crossings are particularly perilous, but the forest complexity defies easy explanation. Kolmården's forested depths have long been woven into local folklore, with tales of travellers who entered seeking holy sites or settlements and never returned, their stories passed down through generations. Legends tell of wandering spirits or unseen presences that mislead travellers, and some stories describe pilgrims being swallowed by the forest, vanishing while still within sight of the next village. While modern science dismisses supernatural explanations, the combination of rugged terrain, hidden waterways and uniform undergrowth provides a factual basis for these long-standing tales. Dense undergrowth, hidden bogs, and the repetition of similar terrain frustrate search parties, while steep ridges and shadowed valleys conceal both human and natural traces. Even experienced teams must navigate carefully, as footprints may be quickly erased by wind, precipitation or wildlife. Elk and lynx traverse the forest silently, and small mammals, birds and insects contribute to the erasure of subtle signs that could otherwise guide a search. Limited cell reception and the absence of clear lines of sight in the valleys further complicate rescue operations. Spruce, pine and birch dominate the canopy, while mosses and lichens carpet rocks and fallen logs. Elk and lynx move silently through the forest, often erasing or obscuring signs of human passage. Seasonal changes alter the forest's appearance dramatically, from bright greens of spring to the muted tones of winter snow and ice. Fallen leaves and undergrowth camouflage natural hazards, and even well-worn trails can appear foreign when viewed from a different angle or after a heavy snowfall. These ecological intricacies create both beauty and danger, providing ample opportunity for hikers or pilgrims to lose their bearings. The repetition of slopes, ridges and narrow paths can distort perception, and the forest's quiet stillness often magnifies minor sounds, creating a sense of both familiarity and disorientation. Water dripping from leaves, the distant call of a bird, or the wind through trees can echo unexpectedly in valleys, making direction and distance difficult to judge. Travellers often report feeling as though they have retraced their steps without realising it, or that familiar landmarks appear in unexpected locations. This subtle warping of perception has contributed to countless disappearances over the centuries. Snow can fall without warning, bogs appear where none were seen, and disorientation creeps in as if the forest itself remembers its long history of disappearances. Guided tours and mapped trails mitigate some dangers, yet even today the forest's dense interior claims those who venture beyond well-marked areas. Scientific expeditions note that navigation through Kolmarden requires constant vigilance, and modern technology cannot always compensate for the forest's natural challenges, particularly in valleys with limited satellite reception. Long shadows stretch through the conifers at twilight, accompanied by the wind, distant bird calls, and the soft murmur of water, all reinforcing the forest's watchful quiet. The sensory environment shifts constantly. A breeze may stir branches, causing shadows to dance, while water flowing unseen beneath leaves provides both sound and a subtle threat. In these moments, the forest appears alive, both guiding and concealing, reminding travellers that Kolmarden exists on a scale beyond human control or comprehension. A worn leather satchel rests atop a mossy boulder, and Kolmarden keeps its vanished pilgrims hidden among the winding paths and shadowed ridges. The unknown endings of Ural taiga forests, Russia. Endless stretches of spruce and fir dominate the Ural taiga, a vast wilderness where human presence is fleeting and the forest scale swallows all sense of time. Travelling through this northern expanse, one is struck by the sheer immensity of the landscape. Unbroken green stretches interrupted only by the occasional rocky ridge, frozen stream, or marshy hollow. For centuries, explorers attempting to chart the taiga's extent noted its ability to confound even the most experienced navigators, and modern hikers continue to experience the same disorienting effects despite maps, compasses, and GPS devices. Rugged ridges rise abruptly from boggy lowlands, and hidden ravines cut through the terrain in ways that make even well-prepared travellers hesitate to venture too far. The combination of elevation changes and marshy depressions creates routes that appear navigable from a distance but conceal sudden drops or treacherous soft ground. Small streams, often invisible beneath a layer of snow or moss, cut narrow channels that can mislead even those familiar with the terrain. These geographic features contribute to the forest reputation as both remote and perilous, where a single misstep can have lasting consequences. Winters bring relentless cold and deep snow, turning even familiar slopes into impassable obstacles, while sudden thaws can hide treacherous ice beneath seemingly solid snowdrifts. Temperatures routinely fall below -30 degrees Celsius, and blizzards can erupt without warning, reducing visibility to mere meters. Summer offers little reprieve, with dense foliage creating a uniform green canopy that conceals hidden ravines, bogs, and fallen trees. Seasonal extremes leave little room for error, and the forest's inhabitants, from humans to wildlife, must adapt constantly to survive. Historical records recount explorers who vanished without a trace during early mapping expeditions, and modern hikers occasionally succumb to the same disorienting conditions despite GPS and satellite communications. Some disappeared while crossing seemingly open ridges, others never returned from trails that locals regarded as familiar. Soviet-era reports mention survey teams and geologists who failed to complete assigned routes, leaving behind only personal items, notebooks, or partially completed maps. The pattern is striking. Disappearances often occur in areas of dense forest or near hidden marshes, suggesting a combination of environmental and human factors at play. Dense forests obscure sightlines, marshy ground conceals hidden watercourses, and steep inclines combined with fallen trees create natural traps that challenge both endurance and navigation. The forest's repetitive patterns make it difficult to track progress. A ridge can appear identical to one traversed hours earlier, and marshes often extend further than initially anticipated. Fallen spruce and pine logs, partially covered in moss, create barriers that may require detours, increasing exposure to cold and exhaustion. Even small errors in route planning can escalate rapidly into life-threatening situations. Teams dispatched to locate missing persons contend with vast distances, intermittent radio reception, and weather patterns that can turn a rescue into an extended, often fruitless ordeal. Helicopters can rarely operate in heavy snowfall or dense canopy, and ground teams must navigate on foot through miles of terrain without clear landmarks. Snowstorms, freezing rain, and strong winds can erase footprints and obscure tracks almost instantly. In a forest of this scale, the search itself can become a test of endurance, patience, and survival skills, sometimes yielding only partial clues or personal items left behind. Mosses, lichens, and thick undergrowth carpet the forest floor, while lynx, wolves, and bears move silently through the trees, erasing tracks and leaving no clue behind. Small animals, birds, and insects contribute to the camouflage of human movement, while large predators can inadvertently shift fallen branches or scrape the ground, further complicating tracking efforts. Seasonal growth also affects visibility. Spring and summer bring dense underbrush, while autumn leaves cover familiar paths, and winter snow can conceal even the most obvious signs of passage. The repetition of ridges, valleys, and unbroken forest can distort perception, leading travellers to retrace steps unknowingly or wander in circles for hours without realising it. Human memory and spatial awareness are challenged by the forest's uniformity. Two ridges can appear identical, streams may follow parallel courses, and hills can obscure distant markers. Prolonged exposure to isolation, cold, and monotony of the landscape can induce psychological stress, contributing to disorientation and poor decision-making. Soviet-era surveys and scientific expeditions documented the taiga's vastness and treachery, often noting the mysterious disappearance of participants whose fates remain unresolved. Early explorers chronicled not only the forest's physical obstacles, but also the profound sense of solitude it imposed. Many noted that the taiga's sheer scale can erode confidence, creating a sensation that one is constantly farther from safety than they perceive. Even decades later, these accounts serve as cautionary tales for modern adventurers, reminding all who enter of the forest's formidable power. Today, adventurers, ecologists, and hikers continue to explore the taiga, sometimes confronting the same challenges that claimed explorers decades ago, reminding all who enter of the forest's enduring power. While modern equipment, GPS, and emergency gear improve survival odds, they cannot eliminate the forest's inherent dangers. Vast stretches of terrain remain unvisited, and sudden weather changes, combined with the density and uniformity of the taiga, maintain a constant element of unpredictability. The wind whistles through the dense conifers, mingling with distant animal calls and the subtle movement of snow on branches, emphasizing the forest's solitude and the sense that it is always observing. Shadows stretch across the ridges, and the echo of falling branches or shifting snow adds to the impression that the forest itself participates in concealing its secrets. Every sound, movement, and change in light reinforces the impression that the Ural taiga is both alive and indifferent, a landscape where human presence is transient and easily lost. A single abandoned pair of boots rests atop a moss-covered boulder, and the Ural taiga keeps its missing travellers hidden among endless ridges and shadowed pines. The Lost Line in South Umpqua Forest, USA, Oregon. Towering firs and dense undergrowth define the South Umpqua Forest, where winding trails carve through ridges and river valleys, leaving travellers in an ever-shifting labyrinth of green. Nestled in southwestern Oregon, this forest is renowned for its combination of rugged terrain and secluded waterways, a landscape that has tested hikers, hunters, and explorers for generations. The forest's name appears on maps and in guidebooks, yet its trails often diverge from expectation, challenging even those with the most meticulous planning. The South Umpqua River meanders quietly beneath overhanging trees, hinting at both the forest's serenity and its latent hazards. Narrow canyon walls rise abruptly alongside hidden streams, while rocky outcrops and steep slopes create obstacles that can turn a short hike into an unexpected ordeal. The forest floor is uneven, with loose stones and exposed roots concealing sudden drops. Deep gullies channel runoff during rainfall, and in certain areas, trails skirt cliffs whose sheer faces appear deceptively stable until tested by the weight of a single step. Even well-marked paths can end abruptly at an impassable incline, forcing hikers to backtrack or seek alternate routes through dense vegetation. Seasonal rains transform dry paths into slick passages, and sudden flash floods in narrow creeks have swallowed trails that appeared safe only hours earlier. Winter brings persistent drizzle and ice, while spring runoff swells streams to dangerous levels. temperatures can fluctuate sharply within a single day, and the combination of wet surfaces and changing conditions often results in injuries or lost footing. Hikers unfamiliar with the patterns of precipitation and river behaviour can quickly find themselves in situations far more hazardous than anticipated. Hikers and outdoorsmen have vanished along well-marked routes, leaving only abandoned backpacks, scattered gear, or footprints that fade into wet soil without further trace. Recent decades have seen disappearances along the Forest Service's established trails, often involving experienced outdoors people who followed standard safety practices. In some cases, companions reported hearing a distant cry or noticing that someone had diverged from the group for a seemingly trivial reason. Search efforts frequently yield only fragments: a water bottle on a ledge, a jacket snagged on a bush, or a footprint trailing towards an untraceable ravine. Dense rhododendron thickets and moss-covered rocks obscure familiar landmarks, and minor miscalculations in route finding can divert someone into hidden ravines or dead-end gullies. The forest's repetitive patterns create disorientation, where ridges mimic one another and streams split into indistinguishable tributaries. Underfoot, the ground alternates between soft soil and exposed rock, often giving the illusion of stable footing when it is anything but. Travellers report a sensation of walking in circles, a creeping awareness that the trail behind no longer matches the memory of the path just travelled. Teams often struggle with limited access, steep terrain, and obstructed sightlines, while weather conditions can delay or halt searches entirely, leaving clues to disappear with the forest itself. Helicopters cannot always navigate the dense canopy, and ground teams face exhausting hikes over ridges and through undergrowth, while coordinating efforts across valleys separated by swift streams. Time becomes a critical factor. A single day's delay in locating a missing hiker can allow weather, terrain, or wildlife to obscure any trace, leaving only questions and speculation in the wake of a disappearance. Thick ferns, towering Douglas firs, and western hemlock dominate the undergrowth, while black bears, bobcats, and deer move silently through the shadows, often erasing traces of human passage. Seasonal undergrowth complicates movement, with brambles, fallen logs, and moss concealing footprints or minor markers. Birds of prey wheel overhead, their cries punctuating the forest's constant background of rustling leaves and running water. Each living presence contributes to the sense of a forest that is not passive, but active in masking the comings and goings of those who venture too far. Echoes in narrow canyons and the repetitive greenery of slopes and ridges can disorient hikers, creating a sense that time and distance have shifted without warning. The forest can compress or elongate sound, making footsteps seem farther away or closer than they truly are. Shadows stretch and contract with the movement of clouds, and subtle changes in vegetation can mislead even the most practiced eye. Prolonged exposure to these conditions often leaves travellers doubting their bearings and questioning whether the trail they follow is the one they initially set out on. Abandoned logging roads and old campsites linger as deceptive markers, and decades of human activity have altered the landscape, complicating navigation and giving the forest an unfamiliar familiarity. In some areas, remnants of past timber operations, such as rusted equipment or cut stumps, create both landmarks and hazards. These historical traces can be comforting to the knowledgeable hiker, but misleading to those interpreting them incorrectly. Paths that once served as routes for forestry crews can now lead into dense undergrowth or terminate in steep ravines, a reminder that human intervention cannot fully tame the forest. Even seasoned explorers face unexpected hazards: wet rock faces, rapid changes in light, and the deceptive uniformity of vegetation can quickly turn confidence into uncertainty. Maps and GPS are invaluable, yet reliance on technology can be perilous in areas where reception is inconsistent and landmarks are difficult to verify visually. Travellers often report an uneasy awareness that familiar routes can abruptly vanish, and that minor mistakes, such as misjudging a creek crossing or missing a trail junction, can have disproportionate consequences. Sunlight filters through the canopy in fleeting patterns, mixing with the sound of running water and distant wildlife, reminding travellers of the forest's quiet indifference and hidden perils. A day in South Umpqua can feel simultaneously vibrant and oppressive, with sudden light shifts revealing previously hidden drops or obstacles. The interplay of shadow, sound, and movement reinforces the idea that the forest is ever-changing, and that what appeared safe moments ago may now conceal danger. A trail that seemed ordinary now disappears into shadows, and the South Umpqua forest holds the vanished hikers in a silence that stretches beyond maps and memory. The missing paths of Val Grande National Park, Italy. Trekkers report a sudden disorientation as familiar trails twist unexpectedly and old markers vanish under the forest's persistent growth, making even seasoned hikers question their direction. Val Grande National Park, located in northern Italy's Piedmont region, is the country's largest unpopulated area, stretching across mountains, deep valleys, and dense forests that have long challenged exploration. Despite modern maps and GPS, the forest conceals pathways that seem straightforward at first, but dissolve into thick undergrowth or terminate at sheer drops, leaving even experienced hikers uncertain of their bearings. The park's combination of alpine ridges and abandoned settlements creates a unique labyrinth where human presence is fleeting, and the environment subtly reshapes every journey. Footsteps echo strangely along narrow paths that wind unpredictably, forcing travellers to navigate slopes and ravines where a single misstep can be disastrous. Trails cling to mountainsides, sometimes descending abruptly into gullies or rising along ridges barely wider than a boot print. Loose rocks, eroded soil, and hidden roots make footing precarious, while sudden elevation changes can exhaust the unprepared, and moments of hesitation can become dangerous pauses. Explorers describe a creeping sense of repetition, where one ridge mirrors the last, and a familiar curve of the trail now feels entirely unfamiliar, as though the forest rearranges itself around those who attempt to cross it. Rain arrives without warning, soaking clothing and making rock and soil treacherously slippery, while sudden fog conceals paths that seemed clear moments before. Weather in Val Grande is notoriously unpredictable. Even summer brings short, violent storms that transform trails into muddy torrents. Winter snow can obscure landmarks entirely, while spring runoff swells streams that bisect the paths hikers once considered safe. The unpredictability amplifies the forest's challenges, and those unacquainted with local weather patterns may quickly find their carefully planned excursions compromised, leaving them vulnerable to exposure or missteps. Equipment left behind, backpacks caught in shrubs, and footprints fading into soft soil testify to the countless hikers who have vanished without a trace. Reports from local authorities and park guides detail dozens of unresolved disappearances over the past century, often involving experienced trekkers who followed well-known trails. Some were last seen near abandoned hamlets, others on ridgelines above narrow valleys. In many cases, search parties find no bodies, and clues that might hint at what happened dissipate with the weather, making the forest a persistent enigma for both investigators and relatives. Decisions at forked paths carry immense weight, as one route can lead to a dead end, another to a precipitous drop, and both demand sharp memory and judgment. Signposts, where present, are often weathered or misleading, and many trails branch unexpectedly into secondary paths abandoned by shepherds or loggers decades ago. A hiker may follow a clearly marked route, only to discover that vegetation or erosion has erased it, forcing a reliance on instinct, which can be misleading in a terrain designed to confound. Each choice carries the potential to lead deeper into isolation, reinforcing the sense that the forest subtly guides visitors away from certainty. Teams often struggle with communication blackouts and inaccessible terrain, turning searches into prolonged operations where every hour diminishes the chance of recovery. Helicopters cannot always navigate the narrow valleys or dense canopy, and ground teams must endure hours of treacherous climbing and river crossings. Even experienced rescuers report disorientation within the labyrinthine network of ridges and gullies, where paths can seem to loop back on themselves or vanish beneath thick undergrowth. The combination of isolation, rugged topography, and sudden weather shifts renders each search unpredictable and often frustratingly inconclusive. Dense beech and spruce undergrowth conceals the movements of wolves and bears, whose silent steps erase human tracks and heighten the forest's sense of untamed danger. Deer and boar traverse the slopes in ways that leave only fleeting traces, while birds of prey circle overhead, their calls echoing through the valleys. Each presence contributes to a living, dynamic environment in which human markers are fragile and transient. The forest is not passive, it is an active participant in obscuring the presence of those who enter, and in many cases the disappearance of a hiker leaves nothing behind but whispers of movement among the trees. Rusted tools, crumbling huts, and the remnants of shepherd trails linger as misleading markers, sometimes drawing explorers deeper into confusion rather than providing guidance. Abandoned villages some centuries old punctuate the park, offering occasional shelter yet simultaneously confusing orientation. Paths that once connected hamlets or logging sites now end abruptly or are overgrown, and historical human traces can mislead as much as they guide, creating an uneasy tension between familiarity and danger. The forest's pervasive quiet magnifies every sound and shifts perception of distance, leaving travellers uncertain whether valleys and slopes are near or far. The hum of insects, the distant roar of water, and the occasional crack of a falling branch can be amplified or muted depending on the topography, affecting both navigation and perception. Hours can pass without apparent movement, while footsteps can seem both closer and farther away than they truly are. This psychological disorientation adds to the physical hazards, producing a sense that the forest itself manipulates time and space around its visitors. GPS devices offer guidance, yet hikers often misinterpret data when confronted with obscured paths, hidden ravines, or trails erased by erosion and growth. Modern trekkers rely on technology, but electronic signals can be inconsistent in the park's valleys, and map coordinates may fail to correspond precisely to shifting terrain. Even minor deviations, such as following a misaligned track or misreading a waypoint, can result in hours of unintended wandering, leaving travellers far from the trail they thought they were on and adding to the mystery of those who have disappeared before them. Shifting light through canopy and rock formations creates fleeting patterns of shadow, making once familiar markers unrecognisable and reinforcing a growing unease. Morning sun and afternoon shadows change the visual cues used to navigate, and what appeared clear at one moment can vanish moments later into darkness or shaded obscurity. Hikers report a heightened awareness under these conditions, a sense that the forest is watching and responding, subtly changing its appearance to confound recognition and orientation. A path disappears beyond reach, and Val Grande holds the footsteps of the missing in a silence that refuses to yield its secrets. The fading travellers of Zhujiaigu's Jaru Valley forest, China. Ancient pilgrimage paths wind through Jaru Valley, tracing centuries-old routes once travelled by monks and hermits whose footprints are long erased, yet the forest keeps silent records of their passage. Carved into the steep mountains of Zhujiaigu National Park in Sichuan province, the valley is a study in contrasts. Shimmering turquoise pools and cascading waterfalls sit alongside dense bamboo groves and rugged cliffs, creating a terrain that is both mesmerizing and treacherous. Despite the park's reputation for beauty, much of Jaru Valley remains remote and difficult to access, with narrow trails that have tested travelers for generations. The paths are deceptively serene in daylight, but the forest's verticality and concealed ravines conceal a peril that has claimed countless visitors over the decades. Narrow ridges and hidden gullies snake through bamboo thickets and conifers, creating passages that demand careful footing and constant attention. A misstep on a sloping trail can send a hiker tumbling into a river below or along an unseen ravine, and even those with prior experience in mountainous terrain find the topography unnerving. Watercourses cut across several trails, requiring improvised crossings that often leave stones dislodged or bridges unstable. Travellers recount the sudden impossibility of returning the way they came once deeper into the forest, as familiar landmarks vanish behind dense vegetation and the intricate folds of the valley. Sudden monsoon rains transform streams into torrents, while fog rising from cascading waterfalls can reduce visibility to mere meters and conceal treacherous slopes. Seasonal shifts bring unpredictable conditions. Spring meltwater accelerates river flows, summer storms swell waterfalls, and winter snow can linger on higher ridges well into March, coating narrow footpaths with ice. Local guides warn that microclimates within the valley can differ dramatically, producing fog banks or sudden downpours on one trail, while another remains dry and navigable. These variations, combined with steep inclines and slippery surfaces, make the forest a labyrinth of danger where a single misjudgment can be fatal. Decades of local records note hikers and pilgrims vanishing along remote paths, often leaving only personal belongings or faint footprints that vanish with the next rainfall. Accounts from the 1980s describe a group of 3 trekkers who set out to explore the northern slopes and were never seen again, their maps found neatly folded near a bamboo grove, but no trace of the travellers themselves. In 2004, a lone pilgrim disappeared near a waterfall sacred to local Taoist practitioners. Rescuers found only a torn backpack caught in a tree. Patterns emerge in the disappearances. Most occur near river crossings, cliffside trails or abandoned structures, and frequently under conditions of reduced visibility or sudden weather change. Old footpaths through thick bamboo or overgrown clearings may appear as trails, yet often end abruptly at cliffs or steep ravines, misleading even experienced trekkers. The forest verticality amplifies disorientation. What seems like a gentle slope from above may turn into a perilous descent. At times, multiple branching trails converge and diverge within a few meters, forming a confusing network that leaves travellers uncertain of which direction leads back to the main route. In certain areas, ancient markers, faded painted symbols or carved stones, remain, but erosion and forest growth obscure their original purpose, sometimes luring unwary hikers toward dangerous terrain. Steep inclines, rushing streams, and thick vegetation impede rescue teams, reducing the chances of finding missing travellers before all traces vanish. Helicopter searches are often thwarted by narrow valleys and tree cover, and ground teams can spend days navigating unstable slopes, only to find traces obliterated by rain or wildlife. Even with modern equipment, the combination of rugged topography and climate unpredictability makes search operations challenging. Locals note that the forest seems to reclaim every trail and campsite swiftly. Footprints vanish in minutes, streams shift course, and fallen branches erase signs of passage. Wildlife, from elusive bears to deer and monkeys, moves quietly through the valley, leaving minimal traces and occasionally erasing or disturbing human footprints entirely. Raptors glide overhead, their shadows fleeting across bamboo floors, and smaller mammals scurry through leaf litter, contributing to an impression that the forest itself is alive and watchful. Seasonal migrations influence both visibility and movement, as animals follow food and water sources, sometimes crossing human trails in ways that disrupt tracks or make investigation difficult. Even the soundscape, the rush of streams, the chatter of monkeys and the calls of birds, can mask footsteps, giving the impression that those entering the valley walk in silence. Small hermitages, ancient shrines, and abandoned pilgrim settlements dot the valley, providing temporary shelter but also creating navigational illusions for those unfamiliar with their positions. Some travellers interpret these sites as points of orientation, only to find that local paths shift around them unpredictably, requiring careful attention to natural markers. Archaeological surveys indicate that these hermitages were constructed in the 17th and 18th centuries and have long been abandoned. Their crumbling foundations and narrow corridors are easily mistaken for safe trails, particularly when dense vegetation hides drops or gullies nearby. Echoing waterfalls and rustling bamboo distort sound and depth perception, producing a disorienting effect that can make distances appear longer and paths more convoluted than they truly are. Many disappearances occur when hikers misjudge a slope's angle or fail to hear approaching water or wildlife, leading them toward concealed ravines or steep embankments. Local folklore has grown around these auditory illusions, with some suggesting the valley swallows footsteps, or that the wind carries voices of those who once travelled its trails. In narrow ravines or beneath thick forests, GPS signals can drop out, while trails destabilised by erosion or landslides challenge modern navigation tools. A 2017 case involved a group of trekkers whose digital maps incorrectly marked trails, prompting a 2-day delay before rescue teams could reach them. Even experienced hikers who rely on satellite positioning find that the forest's vertical walls interfere with signal reception, creating uncertainty and, in some cases, perilous improvisation. Fleeting patterns of light and shadow sweep across bamboo and conifers, transforming familiar paths into confusing shapes and heightening unease. Morning sun filters through mist above waterfalls, creating halos and distorted silhouettes that can make even stationary rocks appear as moving obstacles. Evening shadows deepen the valley's hidden recesses, turning safe clearings into spaces of uncertainty. The interplay of light, sound, and terrain produces a sensation that the forest is simultaneously vast, intimate, and ungovernable. Bamboo overtakes the trail, and Jaru Valley quietly retains its lost travellers, where neither echo nor voice can follow.